Chapter 521. In the inner mansion department, Shangguan Li and Mr. Mei each came out with a box of high-quality incense. Shangguan Li was puzzled. That's strange. When did Her Majesty like to use incense? Didn't she hate these things before? She said that this kind of fragrance makes it difficult to concentrate and makes one sleepy. Mr. Mei shrugged and said, "It's not just Her Majesty who is strange. Li Mu has already treated Changle Palace as his sleeping place. He doesn't read many reports every day, and has to lie down and sleep for at least 4 hours. It seems that having too many women at home isn't always a good thing." Changle Palace. Several burners of incense were burning. Ao Isin leaned against a pillar and dozed off. There was a trace of crystal at the corner of her mouth, and a happy smile on her face. The fate of being someone's mount was completely different from what she had imagined. She thought that she would be ridden every day in the future, going through wind and rain, waking up early and sleeping late. She didn't expect that the life of a mount would be to live in a large and luxurious palace. She had nothing to do every day except wait for 3 meals in the morning, afternoon, and evening. There were countless delicious dishes here, unlike the Dragon Palace, where there were only lobsters and abalones. She had long been tired of eating them. Opposite Ao Isin, Li Mu lay on the table and continued to weave his dream. With the Empress peeping from outside, he didn't dare to have any adult scenes in his dream, but occasionally holding hands and hugging was still okay. Although his relationship with the Empress hadn't developed further in reality, in the long run, it could always melt the defenses in her heart. On the dragon throne, Zoe was holding a book upside down. The content of the book wasn't words, but a dynamic scene. She used the book to cover it so that only she could see it. In the scene, Li Mu was planting vegetables on the grassland beside the lake. In the flower field not far away, another Zoe was holding a pair of scissors and trimming the flowers. Leaning on the dragon throne, Zhou Yi's face was hidden behind the pages of the book. A look of longing appeared on her face. This was the life she longed for. Was this Li Mu's plan for the future? A possibility suddenly appeared in her mind. What would she do if Li Mu told her what he thought? She had never experienced such a thing before. Just thinking about it made her feel a little helpless. These past few days, she had fantasized countless times. If there really was such a day, they could confess their feelings to each other. How would they get along in the future? Her heart was nervous and expectant. When Li Mu got up from the table and looked at Zhou Yi, she immediately put down the book in her hand and hurriedly stood up. She said, "I'm going to the Imperial Garden alone to relax. Don't follow me." Of course, Li Mu knew that if no one wanted to follow them, it meant that he shouldn't. The Empress was really too much. When it came to relationships, she was so hesitant and wishy-washy. She was not straightforward and decisive at all. He had already made it so obvious in his dream, but she still pretended to be confused until the end. He was the Empress. Could it be that he should be the first to speak about this kind of thing? Ao Run had said something that was right. If you like someone, you should fight for it. Only by fighting for it would you have a chance. The Empress obviously didn't take this advice to heart. However, this kind of thing couldn't be rushed. Li Mu planned to take a few days off and give her the cold shoulder first. He would see if she was anxious when the time came. He wasn't in a hurry to woo the Empress. The matters at home were more troublesome. He had already slept in the study for several days. As the first wife of the Li family, Lu Hanyan was very dissatisfied with the voices of the common people. Every time Li Mu wanted to coax her, he was rejected at the door by her. This couldn't go on. Just as Li Mu was thinking about this matter, in the Li residence, Li Qing said to Lu Hanyan, "Sister's anger has almost subsided. Don't tell me you're still planning to let him sleep in the study tonight?" Lu Hanyan glanced at Xiaobai and said indifferently, "I think he's sleeping very comfortably in the study. Maybe he's already so happy that he doesn't want to go home. If he still doesn't take the initiative to come over today, he'll have to sleep in the study for the rest of the month." Xiaobai, who was practicing magic, moved her ears and quietly slipped out. Not long after, in the Changle Palace, Li Mu asked in surprise, "She really said that?" Xiaobai nodded and said, "Benefactor, you'd better go and find Sister Lu tonight. Otherwise, you'll have to sleep in the study for the rest of the month." Li Mu picked her up and spun her around. He said, Okay, Xiaobai. From now on you'll stay undercover by their side. If there's any news, report to me at any time. Xiaobai smiled and said, Don't worry. I'll always be on benefactor's side. Only when she lowered her head did a trace of disappointment flash through her eyes. Actually, she preferred her benefactor to sleep in the study. This was because only when he slept in the study did he completely belong to her. However, she also knew that her benefactor didn't belong to her alone. As long as the other two sisters were happy, and her benefactor was happy, she would also be happy. It was nighttime. Li Mu pushed open the door to Lu Hanyan's room. She was reading when she glanced at Li Mu and asked, What's wrong? You're finally willing to sleep on the bed in the study today? Li Mu sat next to her and said, The bed in the study is too hard. It's more comfortable to sleep here. Lu Hanyan said, Although the bed in the study is hard, Xiaobai's body is soft. Li Mu hugged her and said, Don't be angry. That's just the nonsense of the commoners. I can't abandon you all to become His Majesty's Empress. Even if I agreed, His Majesty wouldn't agree. If you want to blame someone, blame me. Don't blame His Majesty. Lu Hanyan rolled her eyes at him and said, His Majesty even plans to give us such a precious imperial qi. Why would I blame His Majesty? It's all your fault. While I wasn't here, you went around fooling around. Even His Majesty fell into your trap. And that fox from the Yao Kingdom, those two nieces, and that big sister Sue. How come I haven't seen you mention her in a long time? Oh right, and that dragon you brought back. Li Mu said indignantly, You're framing me. What could have happened between me and Qing Xian? I swear to the heavens that there's nothing between us. Nothing happened at all. Then what about the others? Lu Hanyan looked at Li Mu and said angrily, You're really hesitating. She bit Li Mu's chest and threw him onto the bed. Not long after, the candlelight in the room flickered violently and finally went out. The next day noon. In Changel Palace, Zhou sat on the dragon throne and looked outside countless times. Finally, she couldn't help but ask, When Li Mu left yesterday, did he say anything? Mr. Mei said, No, but he hasn't come yet. He probably won't come in the morning. Zhou stood up and planned to go to the Li residence, but she quickly sat down again. Because of what happened on the streets of Shundu last time, she didn't know how to face Lu Hanyan. After thinking about it, she dismissed the idea of going to the Li residence. In the Li residence, Li Mu didn't get up until the sun was high in the sky. In fact, he planned to sleep a little longer, but the constantly vibrating sound transmission instrument forced him to get up. At first, he thought it was Ting Xian calling, but after finding the source, he realized that this time, it was the Fulu School's sound transmission instrument. It was used by Hyun Jinko to contact him. Li Mu injected his magic power and asked, Senior brother, what's the matter? In the instrument, Hyun Jinko's voice was a little heavy. He said, Junior brother, you need to go back to Ancestral Court immediately. Remember to bring Qing and martial niece Hanyan along. Chapter 522. Li Mu had never seen Xianjizi speak in such a solemn tone. Hearing this, he also became serious and asked, Senior brother, what happened? Xianjizi said briefly, The two uncle masters are nearing the end of their lifespans and have returned to the Ancestral Court. Xianjizi's short sentence had already conveyed a lot of information. Li Mu said in a deep voice, I understand, we will leave immediately. After putting away the sound transmission Dharma artifact, Li Mu had a complicated expression and sighed softly. Ever since Yuzhenzi advanced to the 7th realm, the Fulu School had 4 7th realm powerhouses for a short period of time. 2 of the Grand Elders had left the sect decades ago and had been wandering outside, searching for opportunities to break through. It seemed that they hadn't found that opportunity these days. As disciples of the Fulu School, Li Mu, Lu Hanyan, and Li Qing explained the situation. The 3 of them didn't delay and immediately set off for the northern region with Zhongling Baiyun Mountain, the ancestral court of Fulu School. In the Dao Palace of the main peak, all the elders, including the sect master, gathered. They couldn't hide their heavy expressions. Hyun Jinko was silent for a moment and asked, Is there no other way? Can't the ancestral court gather the materials for a single heavenly secret talisman? Sect Master Xianjizi shook his head and said, The only heavenly secret talisman made of materials has already been used on Uncle Master Fu Daozi. Dan Xiaoping's first seat. Dan Yangzi thought for a moment and said, I will go to the Pill Cauldron sect. They don't lack spirit herbs. I might be able to gather 2 if I use Fulu to exchange with them. Xian Jizi continued to shake his head and said, I have already asked senior sister Wuqian. Half a month ago, the Pill Cauldron sect failed to refine 2 important pills. They also lack spirit herbs. Moreover, the 2 uncle masters know that they have no hope of advancing, so they don't want to waste any more materials. As his voice fell, the atmosphere in the hall fell silent for a long time. The death of the 2 grand elders was undoubtedly a huge blow to the Fulu school. It would greatly reduce the strength of the sect. The elders present also suffered a heavy blow to their hearts. He had cultivated bitterly all his life in order to achieve immortality, but in the end, he still couldn't avoid dust to dust, and dust to dust. Wouldn't the 2 grand elders be their future selves as well? At this time, 3 figures rushed in from outside the palace. Xian Jizi looked at Li Mu, Li Qing, and Lu Hanyan and said, You're here. The 2 martial uncles wanted to see you before they died. Li Mu asked straightforwardly, Can't we use the heavenly secret talisman to stall for time? Xian Jizi shook his head. We don't have enough materials. Moreover, the talisman of heavenly secrets is very useful for those at the 6th realm. However, with the cultivation of the 2 uncle masters, it can only extend their lifespans by 3 years at most. The 2 uncle masters are unwilling to waste resources. For cultivators at the 7th realm, it was very likely that they would go into seclusion for more than 2 years. 2 years passed in the blink of an eye. At that time, they still couldn't avoid the fate of death. Li Mu. I can think of a way to procure the materials. 3 years is 3 years. There's no need. 2 figures floated in from outside the hall. The 2 old men in linen clothes gazed at Li Mu's group of 3 with gratification in their eyes as they said, Not bad. Even though the 2 of us old fellows are about to die soon, the talisman sect still has a future. Looking at the 2 old men, the peak masters cupped their hands. Martial uncles. This was the first time Li Mu saw the 2 grand elders of the Fulu school. Their auras weren't strong and they looked like old men who were about to die. However, their eyes were extremely clear, without any turbidity. Li Mu and the other 2 cupped their hands and bowed. Greetings, martial uncles. The old man on the left looked at Li Mu and his praise grew. He said, Since ancient times, those who walked the path of psychokinesis were all people with great perseverance. Junior brother Fu Daozi has taken in a good disciple. In the next 100 years, the Fulu school will depend on you. Li Mu asked, How many years do you 2 martial uncles have left? Xian Jizi sighed and said, Martial uncles Tian Yangzi and Tian Qingzi are twin brothers. Their lifespans are close to 360 years. Now they only have 2 years left. Li Mu. 2 years plus 3 years is 5 years. 5 years ago, I hadn't cultivated yet. Now, I'm only 1 step away from the 6th realm. Maybe in these 5 years, you 2 martial uncles have a chance to advance. Tian Yangzi smiled and said, We know our own cultivation better than anyone else. Not to mention 5 years, even if you give us another 50 years, we won't be able to touch the threshold of the path integration realm. In the entire Zhu province, only the Empress of the Great Zhou has a chance to advance to this realm in her lifetime. He glanced at Li Mu and the other heads and said, 360 years, 180 years. We've lived long enough. In the next 2 years, we'll record our lifelong understanding of talisman Dao and cultivation for our descendants. Our cultivation can help 2 disciples in the creation realm advance to Dongxian. You can also refine our corpses into corpses to enhance the strength of the sect and guard against the invasion of the devil path. In the silence of the crowd, the 2 of them floated away. Not long after, Xian Jizi called Li Mu to a side hall and said, Once you 2 martial uncles die, the strength of the sect will be greatly reduced. The devil path won't let go of such an opportunity. For hundreds of years, the devil path has attacked Mount Baiyun several times for this reason. Li Mu moved Zhong Ling out of the demon emperor's space and stretched out his hand. The shrunken Dao bell floated in his palm. He said to Xian Jizi, Zhongling has already transformed. I'll leave the body of the bell on Mount Baiyun. It's enough to deal with the devil path. If the devil path really makes a move, the great Zhou court won't just stand by and watch. Xian Jizi shook his head and said, Uncle Masters, you still have 2 years left in your lifespan. Keep junior brother Dao Zhong to protect yourself first. Your safety is more important. I summoned you back to the mountain this time for another important matter. He looked at Li Mu and said, according to past practice, before the elders of the sect die, they will pass on their lifetime's cultivation to a core disciple. Martial Uncle's cultivation can allow 2 5th realm disciples to advance to the 6th realm. They want to choose between you and the 2 martial nephews. What do you think? For a large sect, this was a very important inheritance. Before the sect's experts died, they would leave everything to the younger disciples. This was to preserve the sect's strength to the greatest extent and ensure that the inheritance would not be severed. Li Mu didn't answer. He only said, let's use the Tianji talisman to extend the lifespan of martial uncles for as long as possible. What if a miracle happens during this period? Xian Jizi sighed and said, the sect's resources are already not enough to write a saint-level Fulu. Li Mu said, senior martial brother, you don't have to worry about the materials. I'll take care of it. Xian Jizi asked, how can you take care of it? Saint-level Fulu was extremely precious. Even with the entire Fulu school's resources, it was still difficult to gather them. How could he compare to the entire Fulu school by himself? Li Mu took out the spirit snail and inserted his magic power. Before he could speak, the Empress's voice came from the other side. Where have you been? You haven't come to Chang'e Palace for 2 days. You didn't even say hello. Li Mu said, something urgent happened in the sect. I brought my wife to Mount Baiyun. Zhou Yi asked, when will you be back? Li Mu said, I'm not sure at the moment. There's something I'd like to ask for your Majesty's help with. Zhou Yi said, what is it? Speak. Li Mu said straightforwardly, there are 2 grand elders in the sect who are nearing the end of their lifespan. I'd like to refine 2 Tianji talismans. Before he could finish, Zhou Yi said, the Imperial Court probably only has enough materials for 1 Tianji talisman. I'll have the apricot guards send it to you immediately. Hearing the urgency of the situation, the Empress hung up the spirit snail and prepared the materials Li Mu needed. Beside Li Mu, Xian Jizi opened his mouth and said, that's rude of me. I haven't thanked your Majesty yet. Li Mu waved his hand and said, we're family. There's no need to thank me. Xian Jizi pondered for a while but still couldn't understand what Li Mu meant by family. Then he thought of something more important and said, the sect still has some talisman liquid. I'll go to the other 5 sects personally. I should be able to gather the materials for the other Tianji talisman. Li Mu shook his head and said, there's no need. We don't need to ask outsiders for help. He took out another talisman and inserted his magic power. Soon, Phantom Princess's voice came from it. The sun has risen from the west. You're actually looking for me? Li Mu said embarrassedly, I have something I need your help with. I need some high-grade spirit medicine. Phantom Princess said calmly, will you come and get it yourself, or should I have someone send it to you? Li Mu thought for a moment and said, I'll go get it myself. After putting away the talisman, Xian Jizi looked at him and asked, who's on the other side? Li Mu said, the Queen of the Thousand Fox Kingdom. He said there was no need to ask outsiders for help. Xian Jizi thought for a moment and asked with uncertainty, the Queen of the Thousand Fox Kingdom is your wife? Chapter 523. After thinking for a long time, Xian Jizi looked at Li Mu and said solemnly, how about I give up my position earlier? I believe that under your leadership, Flu School will become better and better. Li Mu waved his hand and said, my cultivation is low and not enough to convince the others. Senior brother, you should be the headmaster for now. As a member of the Flu School, the Flu School had treated him well, and had even given him the treasure of the school. Even if he had to spend a lot of precious resources, and could only help the 2 Taishang elders live for another 3 years, Li Mu would not hesitate. Although asking the Empress and Phantom Princess for help was a bit of a freeloader, if the Empress was willing, Li Mu could be hers and there was no need to be so calculative. As for Phantom Princess, Li Mu had helped her so many times, so it would not be too much for her to help Li Mu once, right? The Empress said that after the materials were gathered, she would have Mr. May send it over. Li Mu did not think about it earlier, and only now realized that he needed the help of a level 7 primordial spirit to write the Flu. If Mr. May sent it over, wouldn't he be possessed by Xian Jizi again? If he had a choice, of course he would want the Empress to possess him. So Li Mu took out the spirit snail again, and told the Empress that there was no need to trouble Mr. May to make another trip. He would go back to Shundu to write the talisman himself. Before that, he had to go to the Yao Kingdom. Lu Hanyan and Li Qing stayed in the sect for the time being. Although the Empress had already reserved the Emperor's qi for them, not everyone could be like the Empress, who could rely on the Emperor's qi to reach level 7 when they were only level 5. Before her, the Xiao royal clan had used large amounts of resources to forcefully push the Emperor or the Crown Prince to the 6th realm for safety reasons. Only then would they begin to inherit the Emperor's qi. The two Grand Supreme Elders' 7th realm cultivations were so majestic that even if only a tenth of their qi remained, they could still forcefully push the Creation Realm cultivator to the see-through realm. In the history of Fulu School, quite a few heads had been promoted this way. Although the two Granshang elders had the intention of passing on their power to Lu Hanyan and Li Qing, Li Mu still did his best to do what he should do as a disciple of the Fulu School. The North County was not far from the Demon Nation. After a few hours, Li Mu had already appeared in the Thousand Fox Nation. Phantom Princess had already told Fox 6 to prepare the herbs that Li Mu needed. She asked Li Mu, "Is this enough? If it's not enough, you can go to the treasury and pick." Enough, enough. Li Mu waved his big sleeve, and the pile of spirit herbs disappeared on the spot. He looked at Illusion Princess and said, "Thank you." Huanji rolled her eyes and said, "Why are you being so polite with me?" Li Mu said, "These things are very important to me. It's all thanks to you. Continue with your work. I'll go back first." Before he could fly up, Illusion Princess grabbed his wrist. She frowned and looked at him. She said, "You want to leave after taking things? How can there be someone like you? Also, it's already dark. Can't you stay for a night before leaving?" Li Mu thought about it carefully and realized that it was not very good for him to do this. After taking such precious things, what was the difference between saying thank you and those scumbags who took a girl's body and ran away? He looked at the completely dark sky and said, "Then I'll sleep for a night." It was Li Mu's room in the harem. Phantom Princess had Fox 6 bring in a few dishes. Li Mu had not eaten all day, but just as he picked up his chopsticks, the Empress's spirit snail vibrated again. Li Mu made a shushing gesture to Phantom Princess, and then picked up the spirit snail. The Empress asked from the other side, "Have you eaten?" Just this one sentence showed that their relationship was not the same as before. The Empress used to use the spirit snail to summon him, and she would always find some excuse, such as discussing national affairs or giving advice on cultivation. But now she was so direct. With the Empress's personality, what was the difference between "have you eaten" and "I miss you"? It seemed that his strategy for the Empress was starting to work. Li Mu smiled and said, "I'm eating." Phantom Princess suddenly felt that her throat was uncomfortable again. She covered her mouth and coughed a few times. Cough, cough. The Empress's voice changed immediately. "Didn't you say that something happened at Fulu School, and you secretly went to see that fox spirit again?" Li Mu explained. "Your Majesty misunderstood. I only came to Thousand Fox Country to get some spirit medicine to make the talisman liquid for the talisman of Tianji. Tomorrow morning I will leave for Shendu." Zhou whispered, "I didn't give you enough. You still need to find that fox." Phantom Princess snorted and said, "Unfortunately, I don't have anything here, but I have a lot of spirit medicine. If you don't have any more spirit medicine, come find me." Zhou directly asked Li Mu, "When is that fox leaving? I want to talk to you alone." Phantom Princess said unhappily, "You're the one who interrupted our meal. You should be the one leaving." Li Mu was in a dilemma. He had taken both the Empress and Phantom Princess's gifts, so no matter which one he sided with, he would be letting the other down. He put down his chopsticks and said, I have been running around for 2 days. I want to rest. Phantom Princess, you can go back first. Her Majesty should rest early too. Phantom Princess heard this and could only leave. After she left, Li Mu took out the spirit snail again and whispered, Your Majesty, she left. Zhou said unhappily, I told you to stop looking for that fox. You didn't listen to me. She doesn't have good intentions towards you. Li Mu said, Your Majesty, don't worry. I will be careful. Without Phantom Princess's interruption, Li Mu and Queen's conversation became more casual. They talked about how they would live in seclusion in the fields and grow vegetables. At this time, Li Mu did not notice that compared to the last time he slept here, there was an extra decorative clamshell at the head of his bed. At the head of Phantom Princess's bed, there was also a clamshell that looked exactly the same. At this moment, she was sitting at the bedside and listening to the sound coming from the clamshell. However, the more she listened, the deeper her frown became. Li Mu and Zhou Qiong had actually decided to grow flowers and vegetables together in the future. What was their relationship? Could it be that Zhou Qiong had already obtained the advantage of being in a favorable position and had gotten Li Mu first? The more she thought about it, the angrier she got. When there was no sound coming from the clamshell, she immediately went back to the harem. Li Mu had just finished chatting with the Empress and was about to eat when Phantom Princess pushed the door open again. The Empress probably wouldn't call again tonight. Li Mu looked at her and asked, Do you want to eat together? Phantom Princess sat down across from Li Mu and asked in a low voice, Tell me honestly, what are your thoughts towards Zhou Yi? Li Mu thought for a long time and didn't plan to lie to her. He said, It's the thought of growing feelings over time. Phantom Princess said angrily, How can you face your wife? Li Mu said, My wife has already agreed. What? Phantom Princess was shocked. Lu Hanyan agreed to the matter between you and Zhou Yi. Is she crazy? Li Mu didn't answer, and Phantom Princess didn't need him to answer. She looked at Li Mu and asked, You have feelings for Zhou Yi over time. Then what are your feelings for me? You know that the Heavenly Fox clan will repay kindness, but you are still so good to me. You have given me a favor that I can't repay in my lifetime. What am I in your heart? Phantom Princess's expression was serious. Li Mu couldn't beat around the bush like before. The premise of growing feelings over time was to spend time with her. He and Phantom Princess didn't have long experiences together. During the longest time they spent together, he was the little snake and she was Lord Phantom Princess. No matter if it was Li Mu or her, they didn't have any feelings for each other. Now the relationship between the two of them was that of the little snake and Lord Phantom Princess, that of the state preceptor and the queen, that of the six-tailed celestial fox and her benefactor. Their different identities were intertwined, and even Li Mu himself did not know what their relationship was. Phantom Princess naturally had an important place in his heart. But how important was it? Li Mu couldn't explain it with words. Li Mu walked to her side, grabbed her hand and placed it on his chest. He said, I don't know either. Why don't you feel it for yourself? Since he couldn't describe it with words, he would let her feel it for herself. Phantom Princess placed her hand on Li Mu's chest. She could clearly feel his emotions. She didn't know how to describe it. The only thing she knew was that she was very important in Li Mu's heart. She grabbed Li Mu's hand and placed it on her chest. She said, Feel it too. Other than the fullness, Li Mu also felt a love that could drown him. This was Phantom Princess's feelings for him. Phantom Princess looked at Li Mu and said, You also like me, but it's not as deep as I like you. But it's okay. You'll know how good I am in the future. She sat down again and took out a bottle of wine from the storage space. She poured a cup for Li Mu and herself. She said, I'm very happy tonight. Drink with me. Chapter 524. Who would reject the reasonable request of a woman who was full of love for him? Moreover, it was just a small matter like drinking with her. Li Mu raised the cup, and when he brought it to his mouth, he hesitated for a moment. With Huan Ji's style, Li Mu was not sure if there was anything added to the wine. Huan Ji saw the slight change in his expression and said, What, are you afraid that I'll poison it? She drank all the wine in her cup, and then tilted the cup down, Not a single drop of wine leaked out. Li Mu did not argue and drank all the wine in one gulp. It was strange that the wine did not taste like alcohol at all. Instead, it tasted sweet. Could it be a new type of sweet wine from the Yao Kingdom? At this time, Huanji looked at Li Mu and said, "At the beginning, I hated you very much. I have never been bullied like this in my life. I told my father to put a bounty on you and swore that I would repay you 100 times the humiliation I suffered from you." Li Mu explained. "That time, you provoked me first." "Then what about the White Emperor's cave?" Huanji took a deep breath and continued. "You, a man, brought people from the 6 Dao sects to bully a woman like me. You stole so many things from me and even stole the Demon Emperor's heavenly book." Li Mu said. "At that time, we were still enemies. Of course, I would not be merciful to my enemies. Later on, didn't I give you the heavenly book?" Huanji ignored Li Mu and continued. "Later on, something happened to my father and brother. Me and Fox 6 were hunted down. It was you who saved us. You killed Bai Xian and took back the 1,000 Fox Kingdom. You resisted the attacks of the Demon Sect and the Celestial Wolf Tribe. At that time, I knew that other than giving myself to you, I would never be able to repay your kindness in this life." Li Mu felt that his mouth was dry. It was not because of Huanji's sudden confession, but because he was really thirsty and his body was hot. He poured another cup of wine and chilled it with his magic power. Then, he drank all the wine in one gulp, hoping to sober himself up. Phantom Princess was still rambling. She took off her shirt and looked at Li Mu. "Don't you feel hot wearing so much?" Thousand Fox Country was in the middle of a mountain range, and the temperature was just right. With Li Mu and Huanji's cultivation, they were already immune to both heat and cold. So how could they feel the heat? He immediately realized where the problem was. He pointed at the jug and said to Huanji, "This wine." Huanji looked at him with her charming eyes and asked, "Wine, what wine? Where is the wine?" Li Mu was stunned. "Then what's in the pot?" Huanji's face turned red as she lowered her voice and said, "This is our Fox Clan's acacia water. We drink it on the night of the Heavenly Fox Clan's wedding. Every time you come, you leave quickly. I don't have time to develop feelings for you, so I can only use this method." Li Mu was shocked. He lowered his head and chanted, "If the heart is as clear as ice, the sky will collapse. If the heart is as clear as ice, the sky will collapse." After chanting the clear heart chant, his heart quickly calmed down. However, his body was still unbearably hot. This chant had a miraculous effect on the heart, but it had no effect on the body. This heat and desire came from the depths of his body. Huanji took off her second layer of clothes and slowly walked towards Li Mu. She asked, "Since you also like me, why are you still resisting?" Li Mu clenched his teeth and said, "Feelings need to be cultivated." Huanji gently placed her hand on his chest and said, "It's not too late to cultivate in the future." Li Mu used his magic power to resist the desire in his heart. Huanji looked at him for a while and said, "I forgot to remind you. The more you use your magic power to resist, the faster the medicine will melt in your body. Feel it now, isn't your body soft?" She used her magic power that was far stronger than Li Mu's to push him onto the bed. She bit his ear and said with a seductive voice, "Just do it." Inside the palace, on the roof of a certain hall, Hulu murmured, "Lord Huanji should succeed. That's the joyous union pill. No one below the upper realm can resist it." Hujiu didn't say anything. She grabbed the wine jar with one hand and drank it in one gulp. Some people were happy while others were sad. Tonight was Lord Huanji's big day. Tonight, Thousand Fox Country had another sad person. Early in the morning, Li Mu woke up from the soft bed. Huanji was already awake. She sat on the bed and combed her long hair. She looked back at Li Mu and said, "Don't worry, I will be responsible for you. As long as you are willing, you can become my empress now." Ouch! Before she finished speaking, she was pulled onto the bed. Li Mu's face darkened. He clenched his teeth and said, "Fox Demon, you asked for it." Thousand Fox Country Imperial Palace Hall. The demon officials who had been waiting for a long time didn't see Her Majesty the Queen, but only Commander Hulu. Hulu slowly walked into the hall and said to the dozens of demon officials, "The Queen won't have morning court today. Disperse." Shendu Changle Palace. It had been a few days since Li Mu returned to Shendu. He brought back the materials for the second Tianji talisman from Thousand Fox Country. The two talismans that he and the queen worked together to draw had also been taken back to Baiyun Mountain by Hian Jinko. Lu Hanyan and Li Qing hadn't returned yet. Before the two grand elders died, they would pass on their life's knowledge and comprehension to the inner disciples. Other than Li Mu, all the core disciples of Fulu school had been summoned back to the mountain. Li Mu sat below the empress, in his exclusive seat. He had already been reading a memorial for almost an hour. It wasn't that he had encountered a difficult decision, but he still couldn't accept that Huanji had forced him to lose his virginity. The queen had warned him many times to be careful of Huanji, but Li Mu didn't take it to heart. It was too late to say anything now. He hadn't made any substantial progress with the queen, but he had already done it with Huanji. Li Mu hadn't told Lu Hanyan and Li Qing about this yet, because it was embarrassing. The biggest problem now wasn't Lu Hanyan and Li Qing. If the queen knew about this, the consequences would be unimaginable. She and Huanji were like fire and water. She would definitely think that Li Mu had betrayed her. Li Mu secretly glanced at the queen and lowered his head to continue reading the memorial. Zhou Yi also glanced at Li Mu and asked, "How did your cultivation level increase again? Were you?" Li Mu immediately stood up and said, "I didn't betray your majesty. The grand elder of Fulu school imparted his power to me." Zhou Yi finished speaking and looked at Li Mu again. "What did you say you betrayed?" Li Mu slowly sat down and lowered his head. "Nothing." Zhou Yi frowned and said, "I've already noticed. After returning from Thousand Fox Country, you've been absent-minded. Is that fox so attractive to you?" Li Mu's expression didn't reveal anything. He said seriously, "Your Majesty, you've misunderstood. I was just thinking that reality is so cruel. Even a seventh realm grand elder can't avoid reaching the end of his lifespan." Zhou Yi said, "What's there to think about? Everyone will die one day. 180 years is already a lot. A meaningful decade is better than a century." Li Mu said slowly, "Although that's the case, isn't cultivation for longevity? Most cultivators fight for their lives and only live a few years longer than normal people. What kind of cultivation is this?" Zhou Yi didn't agree with Li Mu's words. He said calmly, "Longevity isn't necessarily a good thing. If I had to choose, as long as I can spend my mortal life with the person I love, I'd rather not have a long lifespan." Li Mu said, "I think so too." The two looked at each other. Li Mu's expression was calm. Zhou Yi quickly looked away. Li Mu sighed. They were both rulers of a country. If the queen had half the initiative of Huanji, Ling would have a brother or sister by now. Chapter 525. After leaving Changle Palace, Li Mu went to the consecration department to take a look. Before he left, two high consecrators stopped Li Mu and asked, "Lord Li, there were two strange phenomena in the palace a few days ago. What was that?" Li Mu answered honestly, "It was a strange phenomenon born from the talisman of heavenly secrets." The two rubbed their hands and asked nervously, "The two talismans of heavenly secrets?" Li Mu nodded and said, "That's right. They are for you. Do a good job here. When the time comes, the two talismans of heavenly secrets will be in your hands." Hearing this, the two heaved a sigh of relief and said solemnly, "Don't worry, Lord Li. Don't worry, Her Majesty. We will do our best and love our job." There were still a few years before the two high consecrators' talismans of heavenly secrets were handed over. The Great Zhou was vast and rich in resources. A few years was enough for the imperial court to gather a few more materials, so there was no need to worry. For these high-level cultivators, the biggest enemy was their lifespan. Fu Daozi and Sanggu were in a hurry to take in disciples because they wanted to pass down their mantle and resolve their regrets before their lifespan ran out. After cultivating to the seventh realm, one's lifespan was only 180 years. Li Mu also felt that it was too short. However, the Empress was right. It was much more meaningful to spend the rest of one's life with one's loved one than to cultivate bitterly for a few years and then come out of seclusion. Lu Hanyan and Li Qing were not here. There were only Wan Wan, Xiaobai, and a few maids at home. Li Mu usually did not have much time to accompany them alone. Today he took the initiative to take them out for a stroll. He owed Xiaobai the most. As his spy, Xiaobai was so sensible that Li Mu's heart ached. She often suffered grievances herself and delivered important information for him. In the end, Li Mu still had another fox by his side. Xiaobai still did not know. On the streets of Chengdu, Li Mu was being held by the girls. Xiaobai and Wanwan were chatting along the way. Suddenly, Li Mu noticed that Wanwan stopped in her tracks and stopped talking. Li Mu tilted his head and was about to ask her what was wrong when he noticed that Wanwan was looking in a certain direction on the street. Her face was a little pale. Li Mu followed her gaze and saw a beggar couple begging on the street. The people of Chengdu were kind and charitable. Occasionally, passers-by would take out 1 or 2 copper coins and put them in their bowls. Wanwan stared at the beggar couple with tears in her eyes. Li Mu seemed to have realized something. He silently took Wanwan's hand and held it tightly. The beggar couple begged for dozens of copper coins and walked into a secluded alley. The beggar couple was clearly very familiar with this alley. After more than 10 turns, they finally came to a dilapidated courtyard. The walls of the courtyard were mottled and half collapsed. The courtyard was also overgrown with weeds. Clearly, no one had lived here for a long time. Only some homeless beggars in Chengdu would use this place as a temporary residence. The two walked in through the collapsed wall. In the courtyard, a skinny young man in tattered clothes took the bowls from their hands. He poured the copper coins into his clothes and curled his lips. He said, "They say that the people of Chengdu are generous, but this is all there is to it. It took us so long to get this much." The woman said, "It's already quite a lot to get this in 2 hours. Don't gamble with it." The young man waved his hand and said, I know. I'll go out for a while. You can go to another place. Chengdu is so big, it's enough for us to curry favor for a few months." Watching the young man leave, the man said, "I told you not to give the money to him. He went to gamble and lost it again." The woman waved her hand and said, "If it's gone, then go ask for more. The people here are so generous, we're not afraid of not getting enough. We only have 1 son and we'll need him to send us off in the future." The man sighed and didn't say anything else. At this time, the woman said with some regret, "We shouldn't have lost that useless thing. If we had kept him until now, he would have been able to be sold for a high price, at least 100 taels." The man waved his hand and said, "Let's not talk about this. While it's still early, we can still get some more money today." The two walked out of the abandoned courtyard and walked back to the main street. At the entrance of the courtyard, 3 figures that they couldn't see stood there. Wanwan's face was pale, and her eyes were empty. More than 10 years ago, she was abandoned once. More than 10 years later, she was reunited with her biological parents. More than 10 years later, the wound in her heart that had almost healed was torn open again. Li Mu and Lu Hanyan had always doted on Wanwan like a child, and never let her come into contact with cruel things. Li Mu couldn't imagine how much pain her biological parents had caused her. He took a deep breath and pulled Wanwan into his arms. He said, "Don't forget you still have me and Mississippi." Xiaobai also hugged her from behind and said, me too. We'll always be by your side." On a street somewhere in Chengdu. "Everyone, please do a good deed. Give us a copper coin to eat. Do a good deed. Do a good deed." A beggar couple was begging on the street. Beggars were rare on the streets of Chengdu. There were opportunities everywhere. As long as they worked hard, they wouldn't have to beg on the street. Although the people felt that they were reaping without sowing, there would still be people who would be sympathetic and reward them with some money. The couple stood on the street and were whispering. The people on this street weren't as generous as the people on the previous street. 3 figures stopped in front of them. Standing in the middle was a man, and on either side of him was a beautiful young lady. The 3 of them were dressed luxuriously, and their auras were extraordinary. Such people were either rich or noble, and the 2 of them subconsciously bowed. The girl with an oval face on the right took out a banknote from her sleeve and put it in their bowl. Her gaze lingered on the beggar couple's faces for a long time. Then she turned and left, never looking back. The 2 of them didn't dare to look at the girl from the beginning to the end. Their eyes were fixed on the banknote of 100 taels in the bowl. Their throats moved and they swallowed hard. Did I see wrongly? This is 100 taels. Although they heard that the people of Shindu were generous, they didn't expect that someone would be so generous as to give 100 taels to beggars. After coming back to her senses, the woman grabbed the banknote and hid it in her sleeve. Then, the two of them knelt down in front of the three figures who were already far away. They said joyfully, "Thank you, young master. Thank you, young miss." After the three of them walked past them, they didn't turn back to look at them. Not long after Li Mu, Wan Wan, and Xiao Bai returned home, Mr. Mei came to invite them to the palace. The empress wanted them to eat in the palace today. Wan Wan had always been very enthusiastic about eating in the palace. However, today she only took the plate of vegetables in front of her. She only ate a few mouthfuls of the rice that she usually ate with 3 bowls. Only Ao Qingxin ate happily. Seeing that Wan Wan didn't eat much, he took the initiative to take her bowl and said, "You don't like rice? I'll help you eat." The empress obviously also noticed Wan Wan's abnormality. After eating, she asked Li Mu to stay in Changle Palace and asked, "What's wrong with Wan Wan? Did you bully her?" Li Mu shook his head and said, "Wan Wan met her parents in Shindu today." Zhou Yi asked doubtfully, "Shouldn't she be happy about this?" Li Mu told her what happened today. Zhou Yi suddenly stood up and said angrily, "How can there be such parents in this world?" Li Mu looked at her. The empress's parents weren't much better than Wan Wan's parents. The empress, who felt sorry for Wan Wan, went to comfort her. Before she left, she told Li Mu to let Ao Qingxin go. She usually stayed in Shindu and didn't go out. There was no use in keeping this dragon in the palace. There was indeed no use in keeping him. The only use was that after he entered the palace, the empress never left behind 3 meals a day. Li Mu looked at the little female dragon who was still sitting at the table and said, "You can go back to the South Sea." Ao Qingxin raised his head. His mouth was still stuffed with food, and he looked at Li Mu with a doubtful gaze. Li Mu said, "Her Majesty has pardoned your crime. You can go back." Ao Qingxin swallowed the bulging food in his mouth, and then said, "I can't go back. Our dragon race's promise is worth 1,000 gold. We said 3 years and it's 3 years. Not a day less." Chapter 526. Li Mu didn't want to leave, so he didn't force her. He only warned her, "You can eat whatever you want from now on, but don't steal Wan Wan's food. Otherwise, I'll send you to the border to guard South Lake. You can eat the fish and prawns in the lake." Seeing her nod, Li Mu turned and left. Wan Wan stayed in the palace for the time being. Xiao Bai thought of ways to make her happy. Li Mu left the palace and came to the consecration department. 2 great consecrators came out to welcome him personally and asked, "Lordly, do you have any orders?" Li Mu waved his sleeves, and an image appeared in the air. There were 3 figures in the image. Li Mu looked at them and said, "Send someone to Peace Square. Find these 3 beggars and send them out of the divine capital. I don't want to see them in the divine capital for the rest of my life." 15 minutes later, high up in the sky of the central region, a beggar couple and their son curled up in the corner of the flying boat. They were shocked and shivering. Great Consecrator Chen stood at the bow of the boat with a calm expression. Lordly said he didn't want to see them in the divine capital for the rest of his life. Naturally, he would send them as far away as possible. He looked back at the 3 of them and said, "The 3 of you remember, don't step into the central region for the rest of your life. Otherwise," he didn't finish his sentence. The 3 people at the end of the boat also repeatedly kowtowed and promised. Everything that happened today was too inconceivable for them. They were already scared out of their wits, and didn't even dare to ask a single question. Great Consecrator Chen didn't know what happened. He looked at the 3 of them and calculated with his fingers. He could only calculate that the 3 of them had missed a great opportunity. This opportunity was most likely related to Lordly. If they could form a good relationship with Lordly, even if these 3 beggars didn't have great power for the rest of their lives, they could still be very rich. Unfortunately, they didn't know what they had done to cause Lordly to hate them so much, so they missed this opportunity. Divine capital. It had been a few days since that incident, But Wanwan was still unhappy. In the past few days, she had been silent and didn't eat much. Li Mu was very worried when he saw her. He had been thinking for a long time, but he still couldn't think of a good way to help Wanwan out of this state. At this time, a sound transmission magic treasure in the storage space vibrated. After Li Mu inserted his magic power, he asked, "Senior brother, what's the matter?" Xian Jizi's voice came from the sound transmission magic treasure. Half a month later, Xuanzong of the East Sea will be holding a Taoist exchange meeting. At that time, the 6 sects of Taoism will all participate. Junior brother, do you want to take a look and increase your knowledge? Li Mu was still worried about Wanwan. He was about to refuse when he suddenly thought of something and said, "Okay then." Although he had already ordered people to chase that family out of Fairy's capital, so that Wanwan wouldn't be reminded of sad memories, the current Fairy's capital was a sad place for her. It was hard for her to be happy if she stayed here for a long time. He might as well take this opportunity to take them out for a walk. It would also be a good chance for Wanwan to relax. After that, Li Mu learned about the details of this exchange meeting from Xianjizi. The Taoist exchange meeting was organized by the number 1 sect of Taoism, Xuanzong. It was held once every 5 years. At the beginning, the purpose was for Taoism cultivators to exchange their cultivation experiences and explore the mysteries of cultivation. As the leaders of Taoism, the 6 sects of Taoism would also have the powerhouses of their sects give lectures during the exchange meeting. They would selflessly contribute knowledge of weapon forging, alchemy, talisman writing, and so on. Of course, no one would reveal their cultivation experiences. The core secrets of the 6 sects were also tightly guarded and never leaked. Although it was called an exchange meeting, it was actually not very helpful for cultivation. This was for high-level cultivators. 4 low-level cultivators who had just entered the path of cultivation, especially those who didn't belong to any sects and were exploring alone. This kind of exchange meeting was a golden opportunity that could only be encountered by chance. The basic knowledge that the big sects disdained was also precious to them. The real reason why the 6 sects participated in the exchange meeting was not because they could exchange their cultivation experiences, but because they could exchange resources and take what they needed. The Fulu school didn't lack Fulu, but it lacked alchemy pills and magic treasures. It was the same for the other sections. In the process of trading with each other, they could also improve their relationship. In the Changle Palace, Li Mu explained the situation to the Empress. Ao Qingxin had been listening for a long time. He stood up and volunteered. "Take me with you. You can ride on me. It's more convenient and comfortable than taking the flying boat." This little female dragon who had never seen the world obviously wanted to take the opportunity to see the colorful world. However, what she said was not wrong. Riding on her was much more comfortable than taking the flying boat. Moreover, it didn't consume their own magic power. It only took a meal to fly 1,000 miles. There was another advantage to taking her. Xuanzong was on the East Sea. With her, they could also see the underwater world with Wanwan and Xiaobai. As long as Li Mu didn't go to the Demon Nation, the Empress had no objections. Moreover, the main purpose of this trip was to take Wanwan to relax and help her resolve the knot in her heart. She approved Li Mu's leave without any hesitation. Half a month later, in the East County of the Great Zhou. Since a month ago, many cultivators had begun to gather in the East County. Xuanzong held the exchange conference every 5 years. For these individual cultivators, it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. They either hoped to hear the teachings of the powerhouses from the 6 sects or wanted to exchange for some useful items for cultivation. Xuanzong was on the East Sea, nearly 1,000 miles away from the East County. Cultivators above the 4th realm could cross this distance with their magic power. For those below the 4th realm, even if they learned how to fly, their magic power couldn't sustain it. Most of them chose to travel by boat. Some merchant ships in the East County didn't waste such an opportunity. They carried these cultivators between the coast of the East County and Xuanzong. Not only could they make a lot of money, but they could also get a group of guards with powerful magic power, for free to protect them from the invasion of the Pirates. The exchange conference was about to begin. On the East Sea, there were more than 10 times more merchant ships than usual. The sun was shining brightly, and the sea and sky were the same color. Several figures stood on the deck, their faces full of longing and excitement. Xuanzong, the leader of the 6 Taoist sects, was the holy land in the hearts of countless Taoist cultivators. They only had the opportunity to get close to this place during the exchange conference every 5 years. In the crowd, a middle-aged man looked to the east and murmured, "I've been in the Jushen realm for 5 years. I hope I can encounter an opportunity this time and reach the transcendent realm." A young woman hugged a small bag tightly, hoping to use this precious spiritual medicine she found by chance to exchange for a protective immortal robe from the market. Another man held a broken flying sword in his hand. He breathed a sigh of relief and said, "I've finally gathered enough spiritual jades to exchange for a flying sword." On the surface of the sea, merchant ships sailed slowly. Occasionally, streams of light would streak across the sky and pass over their heads. Soon, they disappeared from sight. The people on the merchant ships looked at the figures in the streams of light with envy in their eyes. Those were the true powerhouses of the cultivation world. The realm of those seniors was the goal of most of them. "Look, what's that?" Suddenly, someone pointed to the sky. Everyone looked in the direction of his finger and saw a huge spirit ship sailing across the sky. There were many figures on the spirit ship. The speed of this spirit ship was much faster than their merchant ships. Soon it disappeared into the horizon. Someone who was knowledgeable immediately recognized the origin of the spirit ship. He said, "It's the spirit ship of the Northern Sect." The Northern Sect's refining technique is the best in the Taoist sections. I hope to buy a high-grade Dharma treasure from the Northern Sect in this exchange conference. In every exchange conference, other than being able to listen to the Tao lectures of powerhouses for free, the thing that these itinerant cultivators looked forward to the most was being able to exchange for Fu Lu, pills, Dharma treasures, and other items from the 6 Taoist sects. The names Fu Lu School, Elixir Sect, and Northern Sect were a guarantee of quality. Everyone was on the merchant ships. Along the way, countless powerhouses flew over their heads. The light from their Dharma treasures was an eye-opener for them. Many of the youths who were participating in the exchange conference for the first time had a strange look in their eyes. At a certain moment, another ray of light appeared at the end of the horizon behind them. Under the gazes of the crowd, a huge white dragon roared from behind. Immediately, a series of exclamations erupted on the merchant ships. "Oh my God! What am I seeing? The dragon race! It's actually the dragon race. I've only seen the dragon race in books. Look, there are figures on the dragon race." When the huge dragon flew closer, they were shocked to discover that there were 3 figures standing on the huge dragon's head. From afar, they should be a man and 2 women. When everyone saw that, they were all stunned. Along the way, they had seen people riding swords, people riding boats, people flying in the sky, but they had never seen anyone riding a dragon. The dragon race was the most powerful and arrogant race in the world, yet it was used as a mount. Then what kind of identity and strength did the person who rode a dragon as a mount have? Splash! The huge dragon flew over their heads. When it reached a certain part of the sea, it dived back into the water and never appeared again. While the cultivators on the surface of the sea were discussing, a different kind of scenery was under the sea. The dragon race was the master of the water race. Under Ao Isen's summons, all kinds of creatures in the sea quickly gathered here. The huge whales swam slowly, the dolphins shuttled through the water, and the ferocious sharks became very obedient and swam around them. Li Mu looked at Wanwan and Xiaobai who were playing with the fishes. When he saw Wanwan's face light up with a bright smile, he heaved a long sigh of relief. Chapter 527. On the surface of the East Sea, there was a gentle breeze. 4 figures emerged from the water, without a single trace of water on them. Wanwan and Little White's faces were flushed. This was their first time seeing the sea, and it was also their first time seeing the beautiful underwater world. The beautiful scene just now had clearly left an indelible impression in their hearts. Actually, it was not just them. It was also Li Mu's first time seeing such a beautiful scenery. Although he had been to the aquarium in his previous life, how could the feeling through the thick glass compare to being at the bottom of the sea? Li Mu looked at the blushing Wanwan and said gently, "You don't owe them anything anymore. Forget about those unhappiness. There are still many beautiful things in this world that are worth discovering. Wanwan reached out and hugged Li Mu gently. She leaned her head on his chest and said softly, "Thank you, young master." Then she took the initiative to separate from Li Mu. A faint smile appeared on her face, and the haze in the depths of her eyes also disappeared. Looking at Wanwan, who had matured a lot in an instant, Li Mu felt both heartache and happiness. He felt heartache because she had used the betrayal of her family twice in exchange for her ultimate growth. He was happy because she had finally walked out of the trauma of her childhood. After giving Wanwan a deep hug, Li Mu Ruang transformed back into a human form. He put away his dragon horns and retracted his dragon aura. Then he brought the three girls and flew towards an area shrouded in clouds and mist. Xuanzong was located on the East Sea. It was isolated from the rest of the world, and did not interact with the outside world often. Only at the Taoist conference held every 5 years would Xuanzong unveil a corner of its hidden veil. No one knew how powerful Xuanzong was, but everyone knew that compared to Fulu, elixirs, array formations, and so on, divine arts were the orthodox Taoism. And Xuanzong was famous for its divine arts. Among the 6 Taoist sects, the other 5 sects typically only had 2 to 3 7th realm experts. Xuanzong had a total of 5 7th realm elders. There were even rumors in the outside world that Xuanzong still had 8th realm experts who had yet to perish. When Li Mu and the 3 girls flew to a large group of islands in the East Sea, they were also shocked by the scene before them. On the surface of the sea, dozens of islands formed a powerful formation. In the sky, there were countless mountains hanging upside down. Between the mountains, there were 5 colored lights connecting them. Cranes were flying back and forth among them. Occasionally, there would be streams of light that emitted a powerful aura. The ancestral court of Fulu School looked very shabby compared to the Xuanzong ancestral court. As the future headmaster, Li Mu looked at the Xuanzong mountain gate from afar and blushed slightly. No wonder Xianjizi didn't come. If Li Mu was the headmaster, he would be too embarrassed to come. Looking at other sects, and then looking at his own sect, when he returned to Baiyun Mountain, he would be too ashamed to see the ancestors who had dedicated their lives to the sect. Li Mu looked at the Xuanzong ancestral court, and took a deep breath. One day he would make Fulu School the #1 Taoist sect. At that time, he would also hold a conference and invite cultivators from all over the world to turn Baiyun Mountain into a Taoist holy land. But right now, the Taoist holy land was still the Xuanzong ancestral court, Penglai Mountain. There were 10 continents and 3 islands in this world. Everyone knew the locations of the 10 continents, but the locations of the 3 islands weren't fixed. Legend had it that Fangzhong, Penglai, and Kunlun were carried by 3 giant turtles and moved on the sea. As long as one could find these 3 immortal islands, they would be able to see the secrets of immortality. Countless cultivators once went out to sea to search for these 3 immortal islands. Among them, there was no lack of 6th realm and 7th realm experts, especially those who were at the end of their lifespans and wanted to find a chance to live. However, no one had ever heard of anyone finding it. Xuanzong named their sect Mount Penglai because they considered themselves an immortal mountain to set off their status. Although it was a little self-flattering, in the entire ancestral province, only they had the strength to do so. The area near Xuanzong had a large formation set up that prohibited flying. Li Mu brought the 3 girls to the front of the sect, and entered Xuanzong with the cultivators who had just arrived. Not everyone could enter this conference. The entrance fee was 10 pieces of spiritual jade. For someone like Li Mu who was supported by 2 queens, 10 pieces of spiritual jade wasn't much. However, some rogue cultivators would still need to put in some effort to gather 10 pieces of spiritual jade. As the #1 sect of Taoism, Xuanzong's method was a little petty, but there was nothing to criticize. The cultivation of the Xuanzong disciples responsible for collecting spiritual jade at the entrance was not very high. They were only at the 2nd or 3rd realm, but their faces were filled with arrogance. They did not even look 5th realm cultivators in the eye. This was normal. In the #1 sect of Taoism, even if they were only guarding the mountain, they were still Xuanzong disciples. In their eyes, even Xuanzong's dogs were superior to outsiders. Li Mu handed over 40 pieces of spiritual jade, and entered Xuanzong with the 3 girls. Some of the cultivators who came here were alone, but most of them came in groups of 3 to 5. Most of the cultivators who came here wanted to exchange for some treasures. They did not need to worry about their own safety in Xuanzong, but that was no longer the case once they left Xuanzong. After every conference, there would be cases of people getting greedy for treasures and killing people for their belongings. After a long time, the cultivators who came here in search of fortuitous encounters learned to travel in groups. Even though the cultivators who came here came in groups, it was still very rare for a man to have 3 beauties by his side like Li Mu. This attracted the attention of many people. The male cultivators revealed looks of envy as they pointed at Li Mu's back. This person is so lucky. Apart from being a little handsome, he looks very ordinary. However, he has 3 beauties by his side. Could he be from some cultivation clan, or the disciple of some large sect? The women of the cultivation world are not so superficial as to only look at the face. I think he must have an extraordinary background. Many female cultivators who walked through Xuanzong's entrance were also discussing softly. Look at his bearing. He must be the disciple of a famous sect. I don't think so. He's so handsome and fair. Maybe he's a Xiaobai who was raised by a high-level woman. Definitely not. If he was raised by a high-level woman, why would he have these 3 beauties by his side? It can't be that these 3 beauties are raising him, right? You don't understand. It's precisely because there are high-level women raising him that he can raise others. Of course, it's also possible that he has some special skills, which is why he has these 3 beauties following him. It'd be great if he was a disciple of a large sect. This person looks like a lecher. With my looks, if he takes a fancy to me, I won't have to worry about cultivation resources in the future. Forget it. With your looks, he wouldn't want you even if you gave him for free. You should just give up. Li Mu and Wanwan walked in front, and their faces darkened from the gossip behind them. This group of gossipy women actually hit the nail on the head. His Dharma treasures, spirit medicines, and spirit jades basically all came from the Empress and Phantom Princess. However, there was nothing he could do about this. Putting aside the fact that he was not the Talisman Puppet Sect's sect master yet. Even if he became the Talisman Puppet Sect's sect master in the future, and the entire Talisman Puppet Sect would belong to him, he would not be as wealthy as Huanji or the Empress. They had the Demon Nation and the Great Zhou dynasty behind them. How could they compare to the strength of a nation? Li Mu couldn't refute these women's words even if he wanted to. He could only lead the 3 women a few steps forward and arrive at a large plaza ahead of them. The plaza's floor was paved with countless spirit jades. The entire plaza was divided into crisscrossing streets. The streets were very wide and filled with small stalls. There were tables set up by the stalls, and all kinds of cultivation supplies were placed on the tables. There were pills, Fulu Dharma artifacts, books, and so on. Behind the tables, there were people loudly hawking their wares. Profound-level divine travel talisman, 10 spirit jades for 1. Middle-level essence nurturing pill, 100 spirit jades for 1 bottle. 500 spirit jades, profound-level flying sword, please take it away. Basic Fulu, basic array formation encyclopedia, price can be negotiated. Standing in front of the plaza and looking at the countless inverted immortal mountains, it was like a scene in the divine capital. In Li Mu's heart, the Eastern Sea Xuanzong, the #1 sect of Taoism, didn't seem like much. Chapter 528. What appeared before Li Mu's eyes was shockingly a large-scale trading market. At a glance, there were nearly 100 street stalls set up on the crisscrossing streets. There were people coming and going in front of the stalls, shouting and bargaining. It made the Xian sect ancestral court, which was filled with an immortal aura, look like a marketplace. There was a dazzling array of things on display in the market, from Fulu pills to magic treasures and cultivation methods. There were all kinds of strange things. On both sides of the street, there were rows of shops. In terms of decoration, they were much better than the street stalls. There was also a long line of customers outside. Li Mu glanced around and understood that these people who set up stalls outside were itinerant cultivators from small sections. And those who could open shops on the street were not from the 6 major sects, but from famous Taoist cultivation families. Li Mu casually looked at a few stalls, walked into 2 shops, and found some patterns. All the things in the shops were very expensive, but the quality was definitely top-notch. On the other hand, the things in the stalls on the streets were of mixed quality, but they were cheap. If one's eyesight was good enough, they might be able to find something good. In terms of service, the itinerant cultivators in the stalls were full of enthusiasm. They had smiles on their faces from beginning to end, making people feel like they were bathing in a spring breeze. The disciples of the sects and families in the shops were all expressionless and ignored people. Even so, there was still an endless stream of customers in these shops. This was also very normal. When cultivators bought cultivation items, the first thing they looked at was the quality. If the fulu didn't work, the flying sword would break when it collided with people, and the elixir would explode and die. No matter how cheap it was, no one would buy it. The 6 major sects each studied their own path, and each of them was an old shop with nearly 1,000 years of history. Buying things from the 6 major sects might be expensive, but they would never buy the wrong thing. This was related to their lives, and almost no one would care about that little bit of spiritual jade. Only some cultivators who were really embarrassed with money would patronize the roadside stalls. Shopping was a woman's nature. Even female dragons and female foxes were no exception. Xiaobai, Wanwan, and Qing Xian had just arrived, and their eyes were already busy. Although they followed closely behind Li Mu, their eyes kept looking around. Li Mu came out this time to make Wanwan happy. After casually visiting 2 shops, he said to them, "You 3 can shop by yourselves. Tell me if you see anything you like. You can buy anything you want today." Wanwan and Xiaobai, of course, Li Mu doted on them as much as he could. Qing Xian had performed well along the way. Wanwan was able to walk out of her depressed state because of Qing Xian, so Li Mu counted her in. It was said that every dragon had countless treasures, and their wealth was comparable to that of a country. When she escaped from her home, she only had 2 pitchforks on her, which was really a disgrace to the dragon race. Li Mu was rarely generous and let her buy some goods. "Thank you, young master." "Thank you, benefactor." Hearing this, Xiaobai Wanwan's face showed excitement. She quickly stood on tiptoe and kissed Li Mu on both sides of his face. This scene made many of the surrounding male cultivators extremely envious. "Thank you, my lord." Qing Xian imitated them and puckered her lips. Li Mu pressed her head and said, "Forget about you. You smell like seafood." After receiving Li Mu's promise, the 3 girls completely let go of their natural instincts. They lingered in front of various stalls and shops. Other cultivators were either looking at magic treasures or fulu pills, but they never lacked these. Their eyes were full of immortal clothes and accessories. Everyone loved beauty, especially women. But in the cultivation world, cultivators' pursuit of strength was always the first. They would not spend precious spiritual jades to buy things that were not suitable for them. In front of a small stall, the 3 girls stopped at the same time. The accessories and clothes here, whether it was the material or the style, could not be compared to the shops in the secular world. Although they were not useful, they were good-looking. Especially when compared to the simple stalls and shops in the surroundings, it was a beautiful scenery. A few female cultivators were also attracted by the goods on the stall. After asking about the price, they shook their heads and walked away. Although these clothes were called immortal clothes, other than the beautiful style, they had no other use. The defense was pitifully weak. Who would spend 100 spiritual jades to buy these flashy but useless things? The owner of the stall was a young man. He was short and ugly. At this moment, he was sitting on a stone bench with a frown. He had already set up a stall for half a day, but he could not sell a single piece of clothing or jewelry. He knew very well why the goods could not be sold. Although these things were beautiful, they were not practical for cultivators. Female cultivators among the loose cultivators liked them but could not afford them. Female cultivators in aristocratic families and sects did not lack spiritual jades. They would not condescend to buy clothes at a roadside stall. If they wanted to go, they would go to the shops of the big sections. Although the things there were not beautiful, they were practical. He could not compare. Unfortunately, when he went to those sects to ask for cooperation, and wanted to put the immortal clothes in their shops to sell. Even if he gave them 40% of the profits, he was mercilessly rejected. Seeing 3 more beautiful female cultivators in front of the stall, the depressed expression on the young man's face disappeared in a second. He put on a bright smile and said enthusiastically, "Dear customers, what would you like to see?" Seeing Wanwan's gaze looking at one of the immortal clothes, he immediately said, "This colorful cloud brocade dress is very suitable for you. This dress is woven from the silk of a transformed silkworm demon. You can touch it with your hand. This dress is smooth to the touch and feels light when worn. It is very comfortable. In addition, this immortal clothes also have the effect of avoiding dust. It is also a defensive magic artifact." Xiao Bai's gaze swept past a piece of clothing, and he immediately said, "Miss, this purple silk dress with jade green patterns doesn't suit you. Look at this silver-patterned 100 butterflies flower dress at the side. I feel that this immortal robe suits your temperament better." Chang Xian's gaze only lingered on the pendant for a moment. The young man continued, "Miss, you have good eyesight. This 5-colored stone pendant is naturally formed. There is no trace of carving. It is the best of the best. As long as you pay 200 spirit jades, you can have it." This young man was obviously very good at promoting. With just a few words, Wanwan and the others were tempted to buy. Li Mu saw that and did not stop them. Although these bright and beautiful clothes did not have any practical use, Wanwan and the others' defensive magic artifacts were more advanced clothes-fitting inner armor. They bought these clothes for beauty. In the end, the 3 women each chose a piece of clothing and a piece of jewelry. Li Mu was about to pay when the vendor continued, "Miss, don't you want to look at something else? You just chose autumn clothes. There are spring, summer and winter clothes here. Look at this lotus leaf feather gauze dress. It is very suitable for summer. And this cloud butterfly dress is the best choice for spring clothes. If you miss this opportunity, you will have to wait 5 years." Wanwan and Xiao Bai thought about it and felt that what he said made sense. Thus, they each bought a few more pieces of clothing. The young man knew that he had met a big customer this time. The smile on his face became even brighter. He continued, "Miss, do you want to buy a few pieces for your friends? If there are more than 20 pieces, I can give you a 10% discount for each piece. If you buy 10,000 spiritual jades this time, I will give you a 20% discount next time." Wanwan turned to look at Li Mu and said, "Young master, why don't you buy a few pieces for Miss and Big Sister Qing?" Xiao Bai also said, "Also Big Sister Zhou, Big Sister Ali and Auntie Mei. If they know that we came out to play and did not bring them gifts, they might not be happy." Ao Qingxin also looked at Li Mu expectantly. "Can I buy 10 more pieces for myself?" Although Li Mu did not lack spiritual jades, his spiritual jades did not grow on trees. They were given to him by the Empress and Huanji. It would be a waste to buy these useless things. His heart ached for the spiritual jades. However, he had already said what he wanted. If he went back on his words now, it would affect his great image in the hearts of Wanwan and Xiao Bai. More importantly, if Lu Hanyan and the Empress knew that Li Mu had brought Xiao Bai and the others out to play and did not bring them gifts, it would not just be a matter of them being unhappy. Li Mu could pretend that he did not care. He waved his hand and said, "Buy, buy, buy. Buy as much as you want." The 3 girls were very happy to choose. The peddler's eyes were shining. He held a pen in his hand and quickly calculated on a piece of paper. When Li Mu saw the final number, even if he was mentally prepared, he did not expect that they would actually choose something worth 20,000 spiritual jades. Wanwan also saw the final number. As if she had done something wrong, she tugged on Li Mu's sleeve and whispered, "Young master, why don't we not buy so many?" Before Li Mu could say anything, a voice came from behind him. "You are not even willing to buy such little things for the beauties. You are too stingy. Today, I, Qing Xuanzi, will buy everything that these 3 beauties want. Just treat it as making friends." A handsome young man walked out from behind. The man was hugging 2 girls on his left and right, and there were another 2 following behind him. These 4 girls could not be considered as exceptional beauties, but their appearances were still outstanding. However, when compared to Wanwan, Xiao Bai and Qing Xian, they were somewhat dull. The sudden appearance of the young man and his identity caused a commotion in the surrounding crowd. It's Qing Xuanzi. I heard that he is not even 30 years old, but his cultivation is already at the 5th realm. Among the young disciples of Xuanzong, his strength can be ranked in the top 10. Rumor has it that he cultivates the yin and yang dual cultivation technique. He has more than a dozen cultivation partners around him. I'm afraid he has taken a fancy to these 3 girls. Sigh, why didn't Master Qing Xuanzi take a fancy to me? I am also willing to be his cultivation partner. The young man beside the 3 girls also has an extraordinary aura. He doesn't look like an ordinary person. So what? Even if he has a small background, can he compare to the core disciples of Xuanzong? One who was unaccountably solicitous was hiding evil intentions. This guy who called himself Qing Xuanzi belittled Li Mu and raised himself up as soon as they met. His gaze did not leave Xiao Bai and the other 2 girls for even a moment. Li Mu looked at him indifferently, quietly waiting for his performance. Qing Xuanzi smiled at Xiao Bai and Wanwan and said, I'm Qing Xuanzi, a 4th-generation disciple of Xuanzong. I don't have any other intentions. I just want to get to know the 3 of you. Without waiting for Xiao Bai and the others to speak, he looked at the young stall owner and asked, how many spiritual jades do the 3 beauties want? I'll pay for them. No matter who paid, the spiritual jades would be in his hands. The young man was overjoyed and immediately said, the total is 20,800 spiritual jades. I'll round it down so 20,000 will do. Qing Xuanzi was startled and asked uncertainly, how much? The young man smiled and said, 20,000 low-grade spiritual jades. Qing Xuanzi's eyes widened a little. It's just a few pieces of clothing, and it costs 20,000 spiritual jades? Is this stall owner crazy? His face darkened, and he said angrily, bastard, how dare you scam Xuanzong? What do you have here that's worth 20,000 spiritual jades? Although he had 20,000 spiritual jades, he was not so generous as to give it to a stranger he had just met. The young man pointed innocently at the nearly 100 pieces of clothing and all the accessories on the stall and said, these 3 ladies have bought almost everything here. Qing Xuanzi's face turned red and white. He turned to look at Xiao Bai and Wanwan with a smile and said, ladies, why are you buying so many clothes? As soon as he finished speaking, Li Mu reached out his hand, and a pile of spiritual jades appeared in the void. He looked at the young stall owner and said, there are 200 mid-grade spiritual jades here. Keep them well. Spiritual jades were divided into different grades. A mid-grade spiritual jade was worth 100 low-grade spiritual jades. As the currency in the cultivation world, people were used to pricing things in terms of the lowest grade spiritual jades. Li Mu flipped his hand again, and all the clothes and accessories on the stall disappeared. Flask Sky Treasure. Someone in the crowd cried out in surprise. Which cultivator didn't want to possess a Flask Sky Treasure? It could be used to store items conveniently. However, only 7th-level cultivators could master the Flask Sky art. Even 7th-level cultivators would have to spend a lot of effort to create a Flask Sky Dharma treasure that could be used for storage. This young man must have an extremely prominent background to be able to casually throw out 20,000 spiritual jades to buy some useless clothes and accessories with the Flask Sky Treasure. At least, Qing Xuanzi could not be so generous. Under the strong contrast, the people who felt that Qing Xuanzi was quite charismatic just a moment ago now felt like a clown. On the other hand, the young man who spent a lot of money was filled with an indescribable elegance in his every move. The young stall owner wrapped the 200 mid-grade spiritual jades with a piece of black cloth in an instant. He looked at Li Mu with shining eyes and said, Sir, I'll give you a 30% discount the next time you buy something from me. Qing Xuanzi's face turned from white to black. Li Mu was held by Wanwan on the left and Xiao Bai on the right. When he walked past Qing Xuanzi, he whispered in a voice that everyone could hear. Why are you pretending if you don't have money? The crowd burst into laughter. Qing Xuanzi clenched his fists so hard that the veins on the back of his hands bulged, but he quickly relaxed them. The stall owner had already disappeared into the crowd after selling all the goods and obtaining the spiritual jades. A Xuanzong disciple walked over from afar and looked at Qing Xuanzi in confusion. He asked, "Senior brother Qing Xuanzi, what's wrong?" Qing Xuanzi looked at the disappearing figures and gritted his teeth. Investigate this person's background. Chapter 529. The Xuanzong disciple followed Qing Xuanzi's gaze and asked, "Did that person offend you, senior brother?" Qing Xuanzi said coldly, "This person dared to insult me. I can't take this lying down." The Xuanzong disciple looked at Qing Xuanzi and shook his head. "Since this person insulted you, senior brother, just return the favor. Why do you need to investigate his background? No matter how powerful he is, can he be more powerful than you, senior brother?" Before Qing Xuanzi could speak, Qing Songzi said indifferently, "Who are you, senior brother? You're the leader of the fourth-generation disciples of Xuanzong. No matter what his background is, whether he's a disciple of the five sects, a disciple of an aristocratic family, or a royal family of a country, can he be more powerful than you, senior brother?" Qing Xuanzi looked at his junior brother with a glint in his eyes. Qing Songzi was right. He was one of the 10 core disciples of Xuanzong. As the head of the 6 Taoist sects, Xuanzong was above the secular imperial power. The core disciples of the other 5 sects couldn't be compared to him in terms of status. As for those aristocratic families and the secular imperial family, they couldn't be compared to Xuanzong. What did he have to be afraid of? As if he thought of something, he looked at Qing Songzi and said indifferently, "Junior brother, you seem to want me to have a conflict with this person." Qing Songzi shrugged and said helplessly, "What are you thinking, senior brother? I just think that you're too cautious and you're embarrassing Xuanzong. If you're worried that this person has a powerful background, and you don't dare to provoke him, I'll help you find someone to investigate him. But it might take some time, so please be patient, senior brother." Qing Xuanzi waved his hand and said coldly, "No need to investigate. Why would I be afraid of a nobody?" Seeing Qing Xuanzi leave, Qing Songzi raised his hands and sneered in his heart. "Idiot who only thinks with his lower body. He's just relying on a good master. What right does he have to be one of the 10 core disciples? Let's see if you can afford to offend someone who can ride a dragon." As Li Mu led Wanwan and the others to continue strolling around the market, the number of gazes on him increased. Some discussions and speculations about his identity also began to increase. Some people said that he was a disciple of a cultivation clan, some said that he was a prince of some royal family, and some said that he was a core disciple of one of the 5 sections. Although his seniority in the Fulu school was high, he did not show his face often. As for the other sects, other than a few elders and heads, basically no one had seen him before. Li Mu wandered around for a while with the intention of finding a few treasures. Soon he was disappointed to find that although there were many strange things here, most of them were useless. However, he saw some materials that could be used to write heavenly secret talismans. Li Mu walked in front of a small stall selling elixirs, casually picked a few stalks and asked, "How much are these?" The stall owner calculated and said, 500 spiritual jades. You can take all of them." Li Mu picked up a white stick that was about half an arm's length. It looked like jade and stone, but it was not stone. He placed it in the pile of elixirs and said, "Many of these elixirs are not old enough. 500 spiritual jades is too expensive. I'm too lazy to bargain with you. Including this, I'll give you 500 spiritual jades." In fact, the stall owner did not know what the white object was. It was something he accidentally dug out from the ground 2 years ago. It was abnormally hard and did not have much spiritual qi. It had been left here for a long time and no one wanted it. After thinking about it, he waved his hand and said, "I'll give it to you." He saw clearly that this person had just thrown out 20,000 spiritual jades, so his price was indeed a little high. These elixirs were worth at most 400 spiritual jades. Seeing that the other party did not bargain, he did not lose anything by giving him something worthless. Li Mu picked up the white object and put it away first. It was actually a spiritual bone. On the surface, it did not have much spiritual qi, but after it was ground into powder, it was a material for writing high-level Fulu. Judging from the appearance, the owner of this bone was at least at the 6th Dongxian, if not the 7th realm transcendence. Li Mu was about to put away these elixirs when a voice suddenly came from the side. I'll take these elixirs for 600 spiritual jades. Li Mu turned to look at Qing Xuanzi, who was expressionless. The stall owner naturally wanted to sell more spiritual jades, but he had already promised someone. If it were someone else, he might still reluctantly sell to the young man who made the first bid. However, this was Qing Xuanzi, Xuanzong's core disciple. He could not afford to offend him in Xuanzong's territory. He was in a dilemma. Li Mu saw the stall owner's dilemma and said with a smile, "In that case, let him have this elixir." The stall owner breathed a sigh of relief and quickly said, "Thank you, young master. I'll give it to you as an apology." Li Mu did not even look at Qing Xuanzi and continued to pick up treasures. One moment he had his eyes on a flying sword, the next moment he had his eyes on a bottle of medicinal pills, and the next moment he had his eyes on a cultivation technique. However, every time he wanted to buy it, Qing Xuanzi would step in and buy it at a price that was 100 spirit jades higher than his. Li Mu would always give in. Wan gritted her teeth and said, "This person is too hateful. He always steals what we want." Li Mu smiled and said, "It's okay. The highest bidder gets it. This is the rule. As long as he has enough spiritual jades, he can buy everything here." Many people in the market had already seen that Qing Xuanzi and the unidentified young man were fighting. Every time, the young man would snatch the items that the young man wanted. At first, they thought that the two of them would have a conflict because of this. However, the young man seemed to be very magnanimous. After being robbed by Qing Xuanzi several times, he was not angry at all. After watching for a while, everyone saw the clues. It was not that the young man was magnanimous. He was clearly toying with Qing Xuanzi. He deliberately pretended to be interested in those items. His goal was to waste Qing Xuanzi's spiritual jades. Qing Xuanzi was a core disciple of Xuanzong. Although his cultivation was high, he obviously did not know the ways of the world. He thought that he had benefited, but in fact, he had been played like a monkey. Qing Xuanzi followed behind Li Mu and gradually realized that something was wrong. Seeing the expressions of the people around him and the whispers in the distance, his face became even gloomier. When he saw Li Mu pick up another flying sword, and was about to pay the stall owner with spiritual jades, he did not make a move, which was rare. Seeing that Qing Xuanzi did not make a move, Li Mu put away the spiritual jades that he had already taken out and said to the stall owner apologetically, "I'm sorry, I suddenly don't want them." When Qing Xuanzi saw this, how could he not know that he had been toyed with? His face was livid, and he wanted to draw his sword and fight this person. However, he also knew that he was not in the right now. Once he made a move, even if he won, he would be talked about. He took a deep breath and forcefully suppressed his anger. Seeing that Qing Xuanzi did not fall for it, Li Mu walked to a small stall. The stall owner was a middle-aged man with a cultivation at the third realm. His hair was messy, and his beard was unshaven. He looked rather sloppy. Li Mu pointed at an item on the stone table in front of him and asked, "How much is this?" The stall owner was fiddling with a pile of items on the stone table. He looked up at Li Mu, then lowered his head again and said softly, 1,000 spiritual jades. As soon as he said that, there was a burst of laughter from the surroundings. He wants to sell this lousy item for 1,000 spiritual jades? He must be crazy for spiritual jades. I've already seen him selling here for 10 years. In the 2 exchanges, he didn't sell a single item. He's really determined to come again this year. Of all the things he can do with 1,000 spiritual jades, which idiot would spend 1,000 spiritual jades on a pile of junk? The middle-aged stall owner turned a deaf ear to everyone's mockery and continued fiddling with the items in his hands. Li Mu picked up the item that he had his eyes on and continued to ask, "How do I use this?" The middle-aged man looked up at him again and said, "Fill it with spiritual jades from the back and activate it with dermic powers. Then you can attack from the front." Li Mu looked at the item in his hands. Although it was small, it was heavy. The back was square, and the front was a hollow iron cylinder. Li Mu put it down and said, "I'll take it for 1,000 spiritual jades." The middle-aged man's hands paused. He did not expect that someone would really spend 1,000 spiritual jades to buy his item. Not far behind Li Mu, Qing Xuanzi had a vigilant look on his face. He subconsciously thought that this person was setting him up again, wanting him to spend a large amount of spiritual jades to buy such a useless item. However, if this was really a treasure, wouldn't this person be taking advantage of it for nothing? After careful consideration, he walked up and said calmly, "I'll give you 1,001 spiritual jades." He only had one spiritual jade more than this person. One spiritual jade could not do anything, but it could cause greater humiliation to this person. Li Mu did not give it to Qing Xuanzi this time. He said calmly, 2,000 spiritual jades. Qing Xuanzi said, 2,001 spiritual jades. Li Mu hesitated for a moment and said again, 3,000 spiritual jades. Qing Xuanzi did not hesitate. 3,001 spiritual jades. Li Mu looked furious. He looked at Qing Xuanzi and said angrily, "What are you trying to do?" The angrier Li Mu was, the happier Qing Xuanzi felt. He glanced at Li Mu and said calmly, "It just so happens that I have my eyes on this item as well. The highest bidder gets it. Even if it's one spiritual jade higher, it's still high." A useless piece of trash was actually bid 3,000 spiritual jades by two people. The onlookers were dumbfounded. Was this the world of rich people? Li Mu looked extremely pained. He squeezed out a few words from between his teeth. "For 1,000 spiritual jades." Qing Xuanzi also hesitated for a moment this time, but when he saw Li Mu's expression, he said decisively, "For 1,001 spiritual jades." The pained and conflicted expression on Li Mu's face melted like spring rain after Qing Xuanzi shouted that number. He smiled at Qing Xuanzi and said, "Congratulations, the treasure is yours." Chapter 530. In the market, when Qing Xuanzi bought the treasure with 4,000 spiritual jades, the crowd was stunned for a moment, and then there was a lot of laughter. It was not common to see a core disciple of Xuanzong being played like this so many times. Qing Xuanzi stood there in a daze, and his face turned from green to black. He was played again. This damn guy made him spend 4,000 spiritual jades to buy a piece of trash. Hearing the laughter around him, Qing Xuanzi's face sank. He took out 40 mid-grade spiritual jades and one low-grade spiritual jade, and placed them on the stone table in front of the stall owner. Although he was distressed and angry, he had to pay the spiritual jades. Otherwise he would lose Xuanzong's face. At this moment, his hatred for the person in front of him was monstrous. He took a deep breath and suppressed the anger in his heart. He looked at the stall owner and asked, "How do I use this?" The stall owner put away the spiritual jades and pointed at a groove behind the item. He said, "Inlay a spiritual jade here and activate it with spiritual power. It will launch an attack from here." Qing Xuanzi did as he was told, and inlaid a low-grade spiritual jade into the groove behind the item. He aimed the metal cylinder at the front at the empty space in the distance, and activated it with spiritual power. The spiritual jade disappeared instantly, but there was no attack from the metal cylinder. Instead, the item in his hand exploded. Although Qing Xuanzi put up a shield in time and was not injured, he still looked very embarrassed. The middle-aged stall owner looked at the mess on the ground and shook his head. Failed again. At this moment, Qing Xuanzi's face was as black as the bottom of a pot. He spent 4,000 spiritual jades to buy the item, and with just one explosion, not only did he lose the spiritual jades, but he also lost face in front of so many people. Most importantly, in order to maintain his composure, he could only suppress all his anger and stay here. Because if he left, he did not know what the people here would say about him behind his back. He pretended as if nothing happened, and continued to walk around the nearby stalls, but he was a little further away from Li Mu. After many exchanges, he did not gain the upper hand, so he chose to temporarily retreat. Li Mu was still standing in front of the middle-aged man's stall. The middle-aged man looked at him and said, "What else do you want? I'll make it clear first. Once the items here are sold, they are not refundable. Think carefully before you buy." Li Mu looked at the pile of things on the table and said, "I don't want these things." The middle-aged man looked up and asked, "Then what are you still doing here?" Li Mu looked at him and said, "I want you." The middle-aged man was stunned for a moment. He shrank back and asked, "What do you mean?" Li Mu picked up an item that was very similar to the one Qing Xuanzi had just bought and asked the middle-aged man. This item wasn't originally this big, right? The middle-aged man's dispirited eyes suddenly lit up. You know these things too? Li Mu shook his head and said, I don't understand. I'm just slightly interested, but I'm looking forward to seeing what they look like after they grow up. I'm even more looking forward to seeing more types of them. They can run on the ground, fly in the sky, swim in the water. The middle-aged man shook his head and said, that would require a lot of spiritual jades, a lot of manpower and a lot of materials. Li Mu smiled and said, I lack everything, but I don't lack people, spirit jades or materials. The middle-aged man breathed quickly and said, if you can provide me with these things, I'll give you my life. Li Mu shook his head and said, I don't want your life. If you need these things, come to the Department of Worship in the divine capital of Great Zhou and find me. My name is Li Mu. The middle-aged man was silent for a moment. He looked up and said, you can call me Emoli. Li Mu raised his eyebrows. The successor of the Mahist? The middle-aged man lowered his head and said with a complicated tone, I didn't expect that there would still be people who remember the Mahist. Not long after, Li Mu walked in the market. Wang held Li Mu's arm and asked in confusion, young master, what did you mean by what you said to that person? Li Mu smiled and didn't explain too much. He only said, he is a very capable person. I invited him to work for the imperial court. After walking around the various streets and seeing that they were not as curious as before, Li Mu planned to take them to the Fulu school shop here. He had just taken 2 steps when his right wrist was suddenly gripped tightly. He looked to his right and found that Qing Xian was holding his hand tightly. Her eyes were fixed on a stall. That stall sold all kinds of cultivation books. There were Fulu basics, alchemy basics, and array basics. Qing Xian's gaze was fixed on one of the books. It was a thin book, but there were only a few crooked glyphs on the book. Li Mu didn't recognize a single word. He knew the Great Zhou language, the Shun language, and the Yao language, but he had never seen the one in front of him. Qing Xian didn't say anything, but she had already conveyed her intentions to Li Mu. Li Mu walked toward the stall, but a figure beat him to it. Qing Xuanzi walked to the stall and picked up the thin book. He asked the stall owner, how much is this book? The stall owner bought this strange book from the secular world with a few taels of silver. He didn't recognize the words on it. Seeing that the other party was a disciple of Xuanzong, he wanted to curry favor with him. He smiled and said, if you want it, 100 spiritual jades will do. Qing Xuanzi didn't recognize the words either. He just felt that the book was strange and wanted to buy it to ask his master. He had just taken out the spiritual jades when a voice came from behind him. I'll pay 1,000 spiritual jades. Qing Xuanzi looked back and saw Li Mu. Anger appeared on his face. He gritted his teeth and said, I'll pay 2,000. Li Mu's expression didn't change. 3,000. Qing Xuanzi gritted his teeth. 4,000. Li Mu continued to raise the price. 5,000. Qing Xuanzi threw the book into Li Mu's arms and sneered. This is yours. Earlier, this person asked him to pay 4,000 spiritual jades for a piece of trash. Now he asked this person to pay 5,000 spiritual jades for something that was worth 100 spiritual jades. He was very happy, and even half of his anger disappeared. However, when he saw Li Mu pay the spiritual jades directly, he felt that something was wrong. He wasn't as excited as before. The stall owner didn't care about that. He liked these 2 guests too much. He got 5,000 spiritual jades for free. This trip to Xuanzong was complete. He was worried that the other party would go back on his word, so he immediately packed up and left as fast as he could. The people around shook their heads. Although this mysterious young man was smart, he still fell for Qing Xuanzi's trick this time and lost 5,000 spiritual jades for nothing. They had never seen 5,000 spiritual jades in their lives. Li Mu walked to Qing Xian and asked her with uncertainty, are you sure this book is worth 5,000 spiritual jades? Can you understand it? Qing Xian whispered, of course, this is the secret text of the dragon race. Li Mu was stunned for a moment, then asked, what's written on it? Qing Xian didn't translate for him. Instead, She bit the tip of her finger and dripped a drop of blood on it. After her blood dripped on the page, it disappeared. At the same time, the thin book in Li Mu's hand suddenly emitted a strange aura. Li Mu was too familiar with this aura. This was the aura of the heavenly book. Almost instantly, he put the book into the pot. However, the moment the aura spread out, many people around still felt it. What's that? That aura is too mysterious. Treasure, it's actually a treasure. The cultivators in the market were shocked. They thought that the young man was tricked by Qing Xuanzi. No one would have thought that it was actually a treasure. The aura just now was so mysterious. This book must be a great treasure, and its value far exceeded 5,000 spiritual jades. Qing Xuanzi was completely dumbfounded. He was completely stunned on the spot. At this moment, he could no longer suppress the anger in his heart, and vented it all out. With a thought, a flying sword floated above his head. The flying sword shone brightly and attacked Li Mu. Qing Xuanzi followed closely behind and roared, "Thief, give me back my treasure!" Facing Qing Xuanzi's aggressive flying sword, Li Mu didn't do anything, but Qing Xian beside him couldn't stand still. She took a step forward, and a giant dragon shadow rushed out of her body. The shadow let out a dragon's roar, and collided with the flying sword. The flying sword was sent flying back, and the sword light immediately dimmed. Qing Xuanzi spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes were wide open as he looked at Qing Xian and said in horror, "Dragon race." The market was instantly in an uproar. Dragon race? That girl is actually a dragon. Oh my god, I actually saw a true dragon in my lifetime. I know, she's the giant dragon we saw at sea. That dragon is exactly the same as this shadow. Then this young master is the powerhouse riding the dragon. Who is he? He's so rich that he even has a dragon mount. After Qing Xuanzi and Qing Xian released their auras without restraint, a few figures suddenly flew out from the Immortal Mountain hanging upside down in the sky. Their voices were heard before they arrived. Who is so bold to be so presumptuous in my Xuanzong? An old man flew down from above. Someone in the market blurted out, "It's Elder Hua Yangzi. His cultivation is only one step away from Dongxian, far surpassing Qing Xuanzi. This person is in trouble." Amidst the discussion, the old man floated over. However, when he flew to the market and saw Li Mu, his originally tense face immediately became respectful. He cupped his fists and said, "Hua Yangzi greets Uncle Master Li." Seeing Elder Hua Yangzi of Xuanzong respectfully saluting this young man, the crowd was stunned. Uncle Master? This mysterious powerhouse with a true dragon mount was Elder Hua Yangzi's Uncle Master. Wasn't that the same seniority as the sect master of Xuanzong? Qing Xuanzi was even more shocked and frightened. Hua Yangzi was his Uncle Master. Didn't that mean he had to call Hua Yangzi his Uncle Master? Li Mu didn't know many of the elders of Xuanzong. Other than Immortal Miao Dun, there were only the 5 people who had been to Emperor Bai's cave residence. The old man in front of him was one of the 5. Li Mu glanced at him with one hand behind his back. He looked at Qing Xuanzi and said lightly, "Xuanzong has taught a good disciple." Chapter 531. Hua Yangzi knew very well that although Li Mu was young, he was a second-generation disciple of Fulu school, and was above them in terms of seniority. However, Qing Xuanzi was also a core disciple that Xuanzong focused on. He hesitated for a moment and said to Qing Xuanzi, "Qing Xuanzi, if you have offended Martial Uncle Li in any way, apologize to him quickly. I believe that Martial Uncle Li is a magnanimous person, and won't make a fuss about it." Li Mu glanced at Qing Xuanzi. This old man was smooth and cunning in dealing with things. He covered up everything with one sentence. If he didn't let this matter go, it would seem that he was narrow-minded. However, Qing Xuanzi obviously didn't give Hua Yangzi any face. He didn't even look at him. He quietly put away his flying sword and flew straight to the celestial mountain above. Hua Yangzi looked embarrassed and said to Li Mu, "I'm sorry, Martial Uncle Li. These young disciples offended you. I apologize to you." Li Mu waved his hand and said, "This has nothing to do with you. You don't have to apologize." Judging from Qing Xuanzi's attitude towards Hua Yangzi, Xuanzong and Fulu school undoubtedly had a completely different sect culture. Fulu school attached great importance to seniority. Therefore, even if Xianjizi and Yuzenzi's cultivation had reached the transcendent realm, they still had to respectfully call Fu Daozi martial uncle when they saw him. Similarly, no matter how talented and strong the fourth-generation disciples were, they wouldn't be too presumptuous in front of the seniors of the sect whose cultivation was lower than theirs. Xuanzong obviously valued strength more. Although Qing Xuanzi's cultivation wasn't as good as Huayangzi's, he was also in the fifth realm. Moreover, he was extremely young and had unlimited potential in the future. When facing the seniors of the sect, he also had arrogance in his bones. It couldn't be said which sect culture was better. Fulu school respected the teachers more. However, Xuanzong respected strength, and the disciples had a stronger motivation to cultivate. Perhaps this was one of the reasons why Xuanzong had so many powerhouses. After apologizing to Li Mu, Huayangzi quickly left. In the marketplace, many gazes were focused on Li Mu, and the sounds of discussion were endless. Even elder Huayangzi calls him martial uncle. He must be one of the second-generation disciples of the 5 sections. No wonder he's so wealthy and has a dragon as his mount. Qing Xuanzi really can't compare to such a status. At first, I thought that Qing Xuanzi was a refined disciple of a large sect. Now, it seems that this person is narrow-minded and irritable. What kind of treasure did that senior obtain just now? The discussions reached Li Mu's ears. Obviously, he couldn't stay there any longer. Li Mu prepared to go to the Fulu school shop, but before he went, he stopped in front of a small stall. This stall was where Qing Xuanzi had snatched the spirit herbs and Li Mu had obtained the spirit bone. He reached out and threw a jade bottle to the stall owner, saying, "Refine it well. It's enough for you to break through to the transcendent realm." The stall owner was stunned for a moment. He opened the bottle and immediately smelled a refreshing pill fragrance. With just a whiff, his stagnant cultivation seemed to have loosened. He immediately put away the jade bottle and excitedly bowed to Li Mu. "Thank you, senior." Li Mu waved his hand and left with Wanwan, Xiaobai, and the other 2. The stall owner held the jade bottle tightly in his hand, his eyes full of gratitude. It was easy to find the Fulu school shop here. The shops of the other small sects and clans only had 1 floor at most, but the 5 sects each occupied a large 3-story building. As for the Xuanzong school, their shop was at the center of the place. It was the most prosperous location, and it was 5 stories high. In front of the Fulu pavilion, cultivators lined up in an orderly manner. Fulu school's products had always been in short supply in the cultivation world. Li Mu walked in with the 3 girls. A cultivator frowned and said, "Why are they cutting the line?" A Fulu school disciple looked up and immediately came forward, saying respectfully, "Greetings, Uncle Master." Inside the shop, several Fulu school disciples also quickly came forward and greeted respectfully. "Greetings, Uncle Master." "Greetings, Uncle Master." Seeing this, the people lining up outside the shop immediately stopped talking. However, they couldn't help but be curious. This young man actually had such a high seniority in the Fulu school. Li Mu waved his hand to the disciples and said, "Go about your business. I'm just here to take a look." An elder led Li Mu and the others to the 3rd floor. After offering them some fragrant tea, he respectfully retreated. Li Mu let Wanwan and Xiaobai rest here. He grabbed Cheng Xian's hand, and with a thought, the 2 of them appeared in the Demon Emperor's cave. A thin book with strange runes written on it floated in front of him. There was a page in the book. It was different from the other pages. It exuded a strange aura. It was of the same origin as all the pages of the heavenly tomes that Li Mu had seen before. He reached out his hand, and the page automatically flew out and floated in his palm. Cheng Xian picked up the book and flipped through it. She said in shock, "This really is the Dragon King's relic." The Dragon Clan's language was widely acknowledged to be difficult to learn. They often used a single character to contain a huge amount of information. Sometimes, they used many characters to express a simple meaning. Li Mu didn't understand the Dragon Clan's language. He asked Cheng Xian, "Who is the Dragon King?" Cheng Xian said, 8,000 years ago, he was a supreme master of the Dragon Clan. He once united the Dragon Clan of the 4 Seas. He was the recognized king of the Dragon Clan, 8,000 years ago, a master of the Dragon Clan. Without a doubt, the Dragon King that Chung Xian mentioned was one of the supreme masters that stood at the peak of the continent. Li Mu became curious about the relic he left behind. He asked Chung Xian, "What's written on it?" Chung Xian looked at the content on the page, and her face gradually turned red. Li Mu was speechless. "Why are you blushing? Hurry up and read it. What does this line mean?" Chung Xian lowered her head and whispered, "The taste of the Snake Clan's women is not bad. Their long legs are too clingy." She also said that she would call her sister over tomorrow. "I'm looking forward to tomorrow," Li Mu cursed in his mind. This can't be that dragon's diary, right? He didn't hear the secret information he wanted to hear. Li Mu continued to point to the next page. "What does this line mean?" Chung Xian's face turned even redder. "The Fox clan is really amazing in bed. It's a pity that her brother is a nine-tailed celestial fox. It's not worth it to fight with him. I won't look for her in the future." The book said that dragons were lustful by nature. Sure enough, this old perverted dragon actually wrote a book about love. But whether he should say it or not, the Snake Clan's legs were really clingy, and the Fox clan was really amazing in bed. Li Mu coughed lightly and pulled his thoughts back to reality. "What's next?" Chung Xian continued to read with a red face. "I tricked a Xian ghost these past few days. She said that her physical body had already developed intelligence. I don't know if the two of them together." Stop. You don't have to read anymore. No matter how thick-skinned Li Mu was, he couldn't force a pure little female dragon to read such indecent things to him. That was too sinful. He looked at Chung Xian and directly asked, "Apart from these things, is there anything else that's useful?" Chung Xian continued to flip through the pages. Only when she flipped to the last page did she say, "Lord Dragon King said that he discovered a great secret hidden in the Dragon Clan's heavenly book." Li Mu continued to ask, "And then?" Chung Xian shook her head. "And then there's nothing else." This broken chapter dragon made Li Mu's heart itch. However, he didn't say anything. Li Mu could see for himself. The page in his hand should be the Dragon Clan's heavenly book. However, for some reason, the Dragon King didn't pass it down. Instead, he hid it in this dating diary. Li Mu scanned this heavenly book with his spiritual sense. However, this time, he didn't enter that strange world like he usually did. A strong rebound force came from the page. Li Mu grunted and took a few steps back. He swallowed a mouthful of blood that came back up. He was slightly injured just by trying to comprehend this page. This page of the heavenly book was obviously sealed by someone. As one of the most ancient races, the Dragon Clan had many strange and unpredictable supernatural powers. Li Mu thought for a while, and handed the page to Chung Xian. "Try to touch this page with your spiritual sense." Chung Xian closed her eyes and opened them quickly. She shook her head and said, "My spiritual sense can't enter." It was the same heavenly book. Li Mu was hit by a rebound force when he tried to comprehend it. Although Chung Xian didn't comprehend anything, she wasn't injured either. Perhaps it had something to do with her identity as a dragon. However, why couldn't she comprehend this page even with her identity as a dragon? Why did the Dragon Clan from 8,000 years ago cut off the Dragon Clan's inheritance? Li Mu couldn't speculate about this point. He could only put away this heavenly book first. No matter what, he had made a big profit this time. The heavenly book was a priceless treasure. Not to mention 5,000 spiritual jades. Even 5 million spiritual jades or 50 million spiritual jades couldn't buy it. It was just that Chung Xian acted too hastily just now. She might have attracted the attention of some people with ulterior motives. Li Mu looked at her and reminded her, "Next time you encounter such things, you must keep a low profile and make a fortune secretly. The fewer people who notice, the better." Chung Xian nodded and said, "I know." Li Mu took the book from her hand and said casually, "Oh right, teach me the dragon language when you have time." Chung Xian looked at the book in his hand, and gave him a meaningful look. Li Mu immediately explained, "Don't think too much. I'm not interested in the romantic history of your Dragon King. I just want to learn something new. We humans have an old saying, there's no end to learning. Once I learn the dragon language, I'll be able to discover this kind of treasure the next time I encounter it. Chapter 532. After leaving the Fey Emperor's cave, Li Mu took stock of his gains. Although he had lost a lot of spirit jades, his gains were also huge. Not to mention the heavenly book. Even if Li Mu couldn't comprehend it, it would still be a priceless treasure. As for the Mahist successor, it was an even bigger surprise. Even when the 100 schools of thought were flourishing, the Mahist was not unknown. Although the cultivation of the Mahist members was not high, their mechanical techniques were too powerful. Even the top forces of that time had to avoid them. Unfortunately, mechanical techniques required large amounts of precious materials and spirit jades. Not to mention small forces, even ordinary countries could not afford them. Over time, the Mahist disappeared in the long river of history. Great Zhou was strong, and with the Mahist, it was like adding wings to a tiger. Li Mu was looking forward to what surprises this person would bring him. In addition, the clothes and accessories that he spent a large amount of spiritual jades on might not be worth it to others, but Li Mu bought them purely because he wanted the women around him to look good in them. He also felt that they were pleasing to the eye, so the spiritual jades he spent were not in vain. Of course, although it was not in vain, he still felt heartache. The spirit jades he had, other than his own meager salary, the Empress's reward, and the Phantom Princess's forced gift to him, were all used up. He couldn't just ask them for more. Li Mu also had a man's dignity. If they took the initiative to give it to him, then so be it. If they didn't give it to him, then Li Mu wouldn't take the initiative to ask for it. As a man, earning his own money gave him a sense of security. Leaving the 3 girls to rest on the 3rd floor, Li Mu walked down the stairs alone. Fulu Pavilion had a total of 3 floors. The 3rd floor was not open to the public. The 1st floor was for goods, and the 2nd floor was used to entertain important customers. Although there were many Fulu on the 1st floor, it couldn't satisfy everyone's needs. Some customers would ask for custom-made Fulu for special purposes. Of course, the price would be more expensive. When Li Mu walked to the 2nd floor, a Fulu school elder was receiving a middle-aged man in luxurious clothes. The middle-aged man was wearing a long robe that concealed his aura. The robe was filled with spiritual qi, and it was obvious that it was not an ordinary item. Judging from the style, it should be a product of the North sect. In the world of cultivators, those who were able to afford the ritual implements of the Northern clan were generally people with a certain amount of wealth. The middle-aged man gazed at the elder of the Talisman Amulet sect and said, "To tell you the truth, fellow Taoist Qing Jingzi, I came here this time for the sake of requesting a creation talisman for my son. I only have this one son, and I hope that this talisman can protect him." Creation talisman, heaven rank Fulu. This talisman did not possess any offensive capabilities, but it could regenerate severed limbs and regenerate severed heads. Even if one's heart was crushed, it would regenerate in an extremely short period of time. Having a creation talisman was equivalent to having an extra life. Currently, in the world of cultivators, only the Fulu school was known to be able to draw a creation talisman. Qing Jingzi revealed a difficult expression. He looked at the middle-aged man and said, "Fellow Taoist Shen, you also know that the creation talisman is a heaven rank Fulu. Even in my Fulu school, only the headmaster and a few heads can draw a heaven rank Fulu. Moreover, the failure rate of a heaven rank Fulu is extremely high. Even the headmaster cannot guarantee that he will succeed." The middle-aged man said, "I am very clear about this point, or else I would not have come here. I have inquired about the rules of your school. We will prepare 10 portions of talisman liquid for the creation talisman, and we will also give you 100,000 spiritual jades as a reward." Qing Jingzi nodded and said, "There is something I have to say in advance. If the creation of the talisman fails, all the talisman liquid will be wasted. Out of the 100,000 spiritual jades, we can only return you 50,000. Although the middle-aged man felt the pinch, he also knew that in the world, only the Fulu school could draw a heaven rank Fulu. Hearing this, he nodded and said, "I understand the rules of your school. I have already prepared the talisman liquid and spiritual jades." Qing Jingzi was about to put away the spiritual jades when he heard a voice. Qing Jingzi, come here. Qing Jingzi looked back and immediately stood up. He jogged to Li Mu and said respectfully, Uncle Master, what are your orders? Li Mu brought him to the third floor and asked bluntly, Is this how you treat your customers? Qing Jingzi was confused. Uncle Master, what's wrong? Li Mu said, For a creation talisman, you want 10 portions of talisman liquid and 100,000 spiritual jades, and there is no guarantee of success. Do you think the reputation of the Fulu school is not collapsing fast enough? Although Li Mu was not a businessman, he knew that this was not how business was done. Taking 10 times the materials and a high deposit, and there was no guarantee of success. Even the blackest workshop was not so black-hearted. If the talisman failed this time, who would come to the Fulu school to draw talismans next time? Wasn't this chasing the customers away? This person was so generous. If he could spend 100,000 spiritual jades this time, he might spend 200,000 spiritual jades next time. This kind of high-quality customer naturally had to be kept. Xian Jizi, the headmaster, was already useless enough. His own Grand Elder's lifespan was nearing its end, and the entire school could not even gather the materials for a single heavenly secret talisman. Li Mu even had to ask for help from the Empress and Huanji. If the ancestral court of Fulu school was rich enough, why would Li Mu put down his dignity to live off a woman? Qing Jingzi did not feel anything at all. He muttered, But the rules of the school have always been like this. Li Mu did not say much to Qing Jingzi. He directly took out a sound transmission artifact and contacted Xian Jizi. Very quickly, Xian Jizi's voice sounded from the artifact. Junior brother, have you arrived at Xuanzong? Li Mu went straight to the point. I'm currently at Fulu Pavilion in Xuanzong. I have something to ask senior brother. Li Mu told Xian Jizi the situation. On the other side of the artifact, Xian Jizi said helplessly, Junior brother, you've misunderstood. It's not that we're deliberately making things difficult for customers. It's just that writing a heavenly secret Fulu is often 1 in 10. We can't guarantee success. Of course, if junior brother personally does it, it's fine even if you only take 1 set of materials from them. Li Mu thought for a moment and asked, If I draw it, who will the spiritual jades go to? Xian Jizi said, According to the rules, 20% will be handed over to the sect. As for the rest, junior brother, you can handle it yourself. Li Mu decisively put away the sound transmission artifact and said to Qing Jingzi, From now on, if anyone wants to draw a high-level Fulu, tell them to come directly to me. After saying that, he looked at the middle-aged man on the second floor and asked, Who's that person? He's so generous, Qing Jingzi said. He comes from a cultivation family in Jing country. His family has a spiritual jade mine. No wonder he was so generous. So his family had a mine. Li Mu looked at the middle-aged man, as if he was looking at a pile of spiritual jades. He walked to the middle-aged man's side. Qing Jingzi took the initiative to introduce him. Fellow Taoist Shen, allow me to introduce you. This is Martial Uncle Ling Jizi. The middle-aged man immediately stood up and cupped his hands. Greetings, Senior Ling Jizi. Although the person in front of him looked young, in the cultivation world, one could never estimate one's age based on appearance. Perhaps this person was already an old monster of unknown age. Li Mu smiled kindly and said, Fellow Taoist Shen, there's no need to be so formal. Sit. After the middle-aged man sat down, Li Mu asked directly, Fellow Taoist, do you want a creation talisman? The middle-aged man said, Yes. I'll leave this matter to your school. Li Mu waved his hand and said, There's no rush. Let's talk about the price first. The middle-aged man was stunned for a moment and muttered, Didn't we already talk about the price? He complained in his heart. The price he agreed to just now was already the limit he could accept. If the Fulu school increased the price, he would have to seriously consider whether to buy it or not. Li Mu smiled and said, It's like this. Although the success rate of creating a creation talisman is not high, the Grand Elders of my school have returned to the sect recently. If they personally do it, they won't need 10 sets of materials. 5 sets will be enough. In addition, the Fulu school has been entrusted by you to create the talisman. If the talisman fails, it will be the responsibility of the Fulu school. The 100,000 spiritual jades will be returned to you. The middle-aged man sat in his chair, wondering if he had heard wrong. Why did the Fulu school's price get lower and lower? Not only were the materials reduced by half, but if the talisman failed, the 100,000 spiritual jades would be returned. How could there be such a good deal? Limu looked at him and explained. Our Fulu school is a famous sect. We won't take advantage of you. Since the success rate of creating talismans has increased, we naturally won't charge you so much talisman liquid and spiritual jades. The middle-aged man came back to his senses and immediately said, Okay. We'll do as senior says. Limu thought for a moment and said, I don't know if this fellow Taoist has any friends who need a creation talisman. After successfully creating the first Fulu, the success rate of creating the second one will increase. Therefore, we can buy the second Fulu at half price. In other words, for 150,000 spiritual jades, you can buy 2 creation talismans. Although the middle-aged man didn't need it himself, if someone could buy another one, he would save 25,000 spiritual jades. Thinking of this, he no longer hesitated and took out his sound transmission Immortal tool. He immediately said, Old Ma, where are you? I have a good thing here. Quickly come to the Fulu Pavilion. In the Fulu Pavilion, 2 aristocratic family heads who had traveled thousands of miles from Jing country to Xuanzong happily gathered 10 portions of spirit liquid and 150,000 spiritual jades. They planned to buy a creation talisman each and give it to their family's younger generation to protect themselves. The Fulu school was indeed a Fulu school. They had visited all the shops here, and only the Fulu school could accept the business of the heaven-grade Fulu. Limu personally sent the 2 big clients out and said with a smile, Fellow Taoists, take care. In the future, let's work together more often. Our sect accepts all kinds of Fulu, and will give you preferential treatment. The price is negotiable. At the staircase on the 2nd floor, Qing Jingzi revealed a smile and muttered, 150,000 spiritual jades. If we give Xuanzong 45,000 spiritual jades, we'll make a net profit of 105,000. Limu sensed that something was wrong and asked with a frown, Why do we have to give Xuanzong 45,000 spiritual jades? Qing Jingzi said, Martial uncle, don't you know? All the transactions that our 5 sects conduct here have to be given 30% to Xuanzong. This is also because the 6 sects are from the same sect, so Xuanzong gives us preferential treatment. The other small sects, aristocratic families' shops, and stalls outside have to give Xuanzong 40% or even 50%. Limu was stunned for a moment before he strode out of the shop and said to the 2 figures who were about to disappear, Fellow Taoists, please wait. Chapter 533. In Fulu Pavilion, the 2 family heads returned to the shop and looked nervously at the spiritual jades returned by Limu. They asked, Senior, this is. If you think the price is too low, we can discuss it again. Limu returned the spiritual jades to them and said, This is a new rule of our Fulu school. For valuable Fulu items of the heaven realm and above, after the writing is done, you must hand over the spiritual jades and talismans. This way, in a month, you can come to Great Zhou Shindu to pick up the talismans. Hearing this, the 2 felt relieved and accepted the spiritual jades. They smiled and said, That's good. We originally planned to go to Great Zhou Shindu to take a look, so it's on the way. As they walked out of Fulu Pavilion, the 2 sighed in their hearts. Although they were both leaders of Dao, Xuanzong and Fulu school's attitude towards small and medium-sized sects and families was completely different. Xuanzong was high and mighty. Their shop was opened here, and every time they sold a product, they had to give 40% of the income to Xuanzong. Compared to Xuanzong, Fulu school treated them especially well, living up to its name as the leader of Dao. After sending the 2 off again, Limu finally understood how Xuanzong's magnificent mountain gate and the spiritual jade plaza outside were built. Including the other 5 sects of Dao, the large and small sects of Zhu province, the cultivation families, and countless rogue cultivators were all contributing to Xuanzong's construction. While most of the countries in Zhu province were still in a feudal society, Xuanzong had already taken a step into capitalism, He was the one who wasted his breath, and the one who was tired of writing talismans. In the end, he was actually working for Xuanzong. Li Mu felt a nameless anger rise in his heart. He angrily asked, "Does our Fulu school not have a mountain gate of our own? Why do we have to do business in someone else's place?" Qing Jingzi said, "This is sect master's idea. He said that White Cloud Mountain is a sacred land of the Dao sect, and shouldn't do such unscrupulous things." Li Mu waved his sleeves and snapped, "Don't mention him to me. Xian Jizi, that prodigal son of a bitch. How many spiritual jades has he earned for others over the years? Yet he can't even gather the materials for the heavenly secret talisman. How does he still have the face to be the sect leader?" Qing Jingzi silently lowered his head. He couldn't interrupt when his uncle master was scolding the sect master, and he didn't dare to interrupt. Li Mu scolded Xian Jizi and calmed down very quickly. It was understandable that Xuanzong would provide the platform and take a cut from the transaction. However, they were too black-hearted. 50,000 spirit jades were gone for no reason. Li Mu's heart was bleeding. He was both angry and distressed. When he walked to the first floor and saw the situation inside, he was even angrier. Although there were many customers lining up outside, there weren't many Fulu school disciples in charge of serving customers. There weren't enough people in the shop to begin with. The few disciples who were acting as temporary clerks were still gathered together and chatting happily. They ignored the customers and ignored them. A few customers came in and walked around. When they realized that there was no one to serve them, they turned around and went to other shops. Other than Fulu school, there were also people who were good at Fulu from various sects, as well as some mid-level cultivation clans. The mid-level and low-level Fulu they produced were also of good quality. People who wanted to buy Fulu might not only choose Fulu school. Most of these disciples usually cultivated in their sections. How would they know the ways of commercial service? It was unknown how many customers went to other shops because of their arrogant and rude attitude. Li Mu inadvertently glanced around and saw a familiar figure in the shop on the first floor. It was the stall owner who Li Mu had bought a large amount of clothes and accessories from. He was currently bargaining with a disciple in the shop. He looked at a Fulu and pestered the disciple, saying, "Give me a discount. 1,000 spirit jades is really too expensive. How about I buy 2 pieces and you give me a 20% discount?" The Fulu school disciple was unmoved. He said indifferently, "The Fulu's price is set by the elders. We don't accept any bargaining. If you want to buy, then buy. If you don't want to buy, then go elsewhere. There are plenty of Fulu on this street." The young man looked at the Fulu floating on the counter and hesitated for a long time. In the end, he decided to give up. Just as he was about to walk out of the shop, a voice came from behind him. "Wait." The young man turned around and saw the young man who had thrown out 20,000 spirit jades standing behind him. After being stunned for a moment, his expression suddenly changed. He said, "Don't tell me you're going back on your word. Once a product is sold, it can't be returned unless there is a problem with the quality." Li Mu waved his hand and said, "Don't worry, I'm not here to ask for a refund. Come with me." With that, he turned around and went up to the second floor. The young man hesitated for a moment, but could only follow. When they reached the second floor, Li Mu sat down and said to the young man, "Sit." The young man immediately shook his head and said, "Senior, if you have something to say, I'll just stand and listen." Li Mu looked at him and asked, "What's your name?" The young man honestly replied, "I'm Ma Feng. Ma as in handsome horse, Feng as in wind." Although this person's cultivation wasn't high, he had a good business mind. Especially his mouth, it was simply like a lotus flower. If the disciples of the Fulu school were half as good as him, the Fulu in the shop would have been sold out long ago. Li Mu poured himself a cup of tea and said indifferently, "Ma Feng, that's a good name. Who is your master, and which sect are you from?" Ma Feng still didn't know why this expert from the Fulu school was looking for him. He didn't dare to hide anything and continued, "Senior, I don't have a master, nor do I belong to any sect. The reason I embarked on the path of cultivation was because I found an introductory book on qi cultivation at an old bookstall when I was young. I pondered on it blindly and unintentionally walked on this path. Li Mu looked at him and suddenly asked, "Are you willing to enter my Fulu school?" Ma Feng was stunned. As a rogue cultivator, he had no sect, no background, and no one to guide him in cultivation. His biggest dream was to enter a sect, but his aptitude wasn't good. Even small sects weren't willing to accept him. Entering one of the 6 Taoist sects was something he didn't even dare to dream of. After coming back to his senses, he immediately knelt down and said loudly, "This disciple is willing." Li Mu nodded and said, "Very good. From now on, you are a disciple of the 4th generation of the Fulu school." Ma Feng immediately took off a bag from his back and placed it in front of Li Mu. He said, "These are the spiritual jades that Martial Granduncle used to buy the immortal clothes and accessories. This disciple will return them to you." He had seen what happened in the market and guessed Li Mu's identity. He immediately changed the way he addressed him. Li Mu waved his hand and said, "These belong to you. Keep them for yourself." Ma Feng put the bag back on his back and said respectfully, "Thank you, Martial Granduncle." Li Mu said, "Get up and talk. I have some things to ask you." Ma Feng stood up from the ground and said, "Please ask, Martial Granduncle. This disciple will tell you everything he knows." Li Mu said, "If you were to manage the Fulu Pavilion, what would you do?" Ma Feng was stunned again. "Let me manage the Fulu Pavilion?" Li Mu nodded and said, "You can speak your mind boldly." Ma Feng had a thoughtful look on his face. He was not talented, short, and ugly. Even those small sects didn't accept him. There must be a reason why this senior was willing to let him join one of the 6 Taoist sections. This was his chance. If he grasped it, his future cultivation path would be smooth. If he didn't, he might just be an insignificant rogue cultivator for the rest of his life. He took a deep breath and said, "Martial Granduncle, this disciple thinks that there is a big problem with the Fulu Pavilion now." Li Mu gestured to him with his hand and said, "Sit down and talk slowly." Ma Feng sat down and said boldly, "First, in the Fulu Pavilion, the attitude of the senior brothers towards the customers is too bad. We are not the only shop that sells Fulu here. Since we are the sellers, we have to prioritize the customers. Many customers are not treated in time after entering the shop, so they will go to other shops. In the middle and low-grade Fulu, the quality of our Fulu is not better than the other shops, but the price is too high and there is not much competition. This has caused a large loss of customers." Ma Feng observed Li Mu's expression as he spoke. Seeing that he was not angry because of these words, he continued to speak boldly. "Second, the selling method in the shop is too rigid. 1 Fulu is 100 spirit jades, 2 Fulu is 200 spirit jades, 10 Fulu is 1,000 spirit jades. There is no discount at all, so it is difficult to stimulate the customer's desire to buy. We should set up a variety of selling methods. For example, in the shop, if you spend 500 spirit jades, 50 spirit jades, 1,000 spirit jades, 150 spirit jades. If you buy 2 earth-grade Fulu, you will get 1 earth-grade Fulu for free." Li Mu nodded and said, "Well said, continue." Although he understood these things with his identity, it was not suitable for him to get involved in these trivial matters. He needed a capable assistant, and the young man in front of him was obviously the best candidate. His appearance was not impressive, but he was extremely business-minded. After receiving Li Mu's affirmation, Ma Feng became bolder and said, "The exchange in Xuanzong is only held once every 5 years, and it takes a large amount of our spirit jades. Why don't we set up shops in the sect, or even in the various prefectures of the Great Zhou, or in the various countries of the Zhou province? With the reputation of our Fulu school, business will definitely be 10 or 100 times better than it is now. At this exchange, loose cultivators and cultivation clans from all over the world will gather here. This is a great opportunity for us. We must let the Fulu Pavilion leave a good impression in their hearts." As Ma Feng spoke, he was no longer limited to the Fulu Pavilion, but looked at the entire Zhou province. He planned a path of continuous development for the Fulu school. 2 hours later, he was still talking nonstop. Xuanzong's location is not good. They are located in the easternmost part of the Zhou province. Many cultivators have to travel thousands of li to get here, and the divine capital of the Great Zhou is in the center of the Zhou province. If we can build a market like this in the divine capital of the Great Zhou, and invite the various sects and cultivation clans to move in, we will only take 10% of the spirit jades. This will definitely attract everyone. Unfortunately, this will offend Xuanzong, and the Great Zhou court may not agree. Although Li Mu also wanted to do this, and this would bring in a large amount of tax for the court, there was no doubt that this would cause Xuanzong to have no business at all. Offending the number one sect of Taoism, the strongest power in the Zhu province, was clearly not a good choice at the moment. We'll talk about this later. Li Mu stood up and gently patted Ma Feng's shoulder. From now on, I'll leave the Fulu Pavilion to you. Chapter 534. Fulu Pavilion. Li Mu brought Ma Feng in front of Qing Jingzi and said, "This is Ma Feng, a new fourth-generation disciple." Ma Feng hurriedly bowed to Qing Jingzi and said, "Greetings, martial uncle." Now was not the time for the sect to recruit disciples, but the head martial uncle and martial uncle all had special privileges. Qing Jingzi was just surprised. This person's appearance was ordinary, and could even be called ugly. His cultivation was pitifully low. Why did martial uncle make an exception and let him in? Thinking back to when he entered the sect, he had passed many trials and eliminated many opponents before successfully becoming a disciple of Fulu school. Li Mu continued to say to Qing Jingzi, "From now on, Ma Feng is the shopkeeper of Fulu Pavilion. You will assist him in managing Fulu Pavilion. The two of you will discuss the matters of the pavilion. If there is anything you cannot decide, then come find me." Qing Jingzi's face was filled with shock. He could not believe his ears. A new fourth-generation disciple had instantly replaced his position to become the manager of the Talisman Pavilion, and this caused him to be unable to accept it for a moment. But he couldn't disobey the orders of his martial uncle, so even if he was displeased in his heart, he could only nod and say, "Yes, martial uncle." Ma Feng took a deep breath and puffed out his chest. He said solemnly to Li Mu, "Disciple will do his best to not disappoint martial uncle." Qing Jingzi looked at Ma Feng with an unperturbed gaze. He wanted to see what ability this person had to be valued so highly by martial uncle. Even if he was dissatisfied, he still followed Li Mu's orders and cooperated with this person's actions. Ma Feng first found over 10 young and beautiful female cultivators in the market, and he used them to replace the few Talisman sect disciples in the pavilion before receiving the guests that came to the Talisman Pavilion. Moreover, he promised them that he would pay them 10 spirit jades every day, and they would receive a commission of 1 spirit jade for every 100 spirit jades they sold. He called these female cultivators to the second floor, and spent an entire 2 hours teaching them how to attract customers, and how to promote the goods in the pavilion. He also made a decision on his own. If a customer bought 2 Earth Rank Fulu tickets, they would get a Mystic Rank Fulu ticket. If a customer spent 500 Fulu tickets, they would get a discount of 50 Fulu tickets. If a customer spent 1,000 Fulu tickets, they would get a discount of 150 Fulu tickets. Qing Jingzi wanted to stop Ma Feng several times, but seeing that Li Mu did not say anything, he forcefully suppressed this thought. He and the Fulu school disciple who had been replaced stood to the side and watched coldly. When this person's various mischievous actions ruined the Fulu Pavilion's business, martial uncle knew exactly what this person was capable of. Xuanzong's Taoist Exchange Conference, or Trade Conference, was held every 5 years and lasted for a month. It was a grand event in the cultivation world of the Zhu continent. During the conference, cultivators from all over the Zhu continent would travel thousands of miles to Xuanzong in the East Sea. Most of them were here to exchange for suitable cultivation resources. In the market, several men were walking together. One of them said, "Which one of you will come with me to the Fulu Pavilion? I want to buy some offensive Fulu tickets for self-defense." Someone beside him said, "If you want to buy low-rank Fulu tickets, don't go to the Fulu Pavilion. It's the same in other shops." The man asked in confusion, "Why? Shouldn't the Fulu school's Fulu tickets be the best?" The man said, "Low-rank Fulu tickets are not difficult. If Fulu school can draw them, other small sects and families can draw them too. There is no difference in effectiveness. Fulu School's tickets are more expensive. Moreover, the Fulu Pavilion's disciples are all arrogant. They don't even look us in the eye. If we enter the shop, no one will pay attention to us. After this person spoke, he immediately received the agreement of the people beside him. Brother Su is right. 5 years ago, I went to the Fulu Pavilion once. The disciples of these large sects are indeed very arrogant. I know of a small sect that also specializes in Fulu tickets. Their prices are much lower than the Fulu schools. Last time, I bought one from them. In these 5 years, those Fulu tickets have allowed me to escape death several times. I strongly recommend you go to that shop. Alright then. If I can save some spirit jades, I also want to buy a magic tool. Just as the group was about to walk past the Fulu Pavilion, 2 beautiful female cultivators suddenly came up to them. They smiled and said, "Fellow Taoists, what do you want to buy? Our Fulu Pavilion has an event today. If you spend 500 spirit jades in the pavilion, you can return 50 spirit jades. If you spend 1,000 spirit jades, you can return 150 spirit jades." The smiles on the faces of the 2 female cultivators were extremely gentle and beautiful. The business of the Fulu Pavilion was closely related to their remuneration. The more customers they received, the more spirit jades they would receive. If rogue cultivators wanted to earn spirit jades to cultivate, they would have to risk their lives every time. How could it be as simple as this? In order to attract customers, they used almost all of their skills. The male cultivators originally didn't plan to come to the Fulu Pavilion, but they couldn't resist the enthusiasm of the 2 beautiful female cultivators, and entered the shop with some reluctance. The situation inside the Fulu Pavilion was completely different from the last time they came. There were no longer stiff faces of the disciples of the Fulu school. Instead, there were beautiful female cultivators with sweet smiles. The 2 female cultivators first brought them to a resting area with tables and chairs. They poured tea for them and then asked with a smile, "Fellow Taoists, what kind of Fulu do you need? Do you need me to introduce it to you?" Sitting on comfortable soft stools and tasting fragrant tea, the male cultivators felt embarrassed even if they wanted to leave. One of the male cultivators' throat moved and he said, "I need some profound rank offensive Fulu." One of the female cultivators smiled and said, "Profound rank offensive Fulu. I recommend the Guiding Lightning Talisman, Fire Snake Talisman, and Icicle Talisman. The Guiding Lightning Talisman has a sale today. Buy one and get one free. The Fire Snake Talisman and Icicle Talisman can participate in the full discount." The man's companion tugged at his sleeve and said, "Buy one Lightning Talisman and get one free. This is much more cost-effective than other shops. I've used this talisman to kill several enemies. You'd better buy more." The male cultivator immediately said, "Then I want 5 Guiding Lightning Talismans." The female cultivator smiled and said, "Do you also need other Fulu? For example, the Divine Travel Talisman or something like that?" The male cultivator shook his head and said, "No need. I don't travel often. I don't need the Divine Travel Talisman." The beautiful female cultivator said, "The Divine Travel Talisman is not only useful for traveling. When you encounter a strong enemy, this talisman can also save your life. Especially the high-ranked Divine Travel Talisman. It can make enemies 2 realms higher than you unable to catch up." The male cultivator thought carefully and seemed to be convinced. He nodded and said, "Then give me 2 of the profound ranked Divine Travel Talisman." They sat there and tasted tea. Soon, the female cultivator brought them the Fulu they needed. The male cultivator paid the spiritual jades and put away the Fulu. He said to the people around him, "Do you guys want to buy any Fulu?" One of the male cultivators shook his head and said, "I want to buy a magic treasure. We'll go to the North Sex Tool Refining Pavilion later." The female cultivator's expression changed when she heard this. She said unhurriedly, "Fellow Taoist, our Fulu Pavilion also sells magic treasures. Do you want to take a look?" Although the Fulu school specialized in Fulu, there were also elders in the school who knew how to refine tools and elixirs. In the entire Fulu Pavilion, Fulu accounted for 70% of the goods, while elixirs and magic treasures accounted for 30%. The male cultivator said politely, "No need." The female cultivator did not give up. She smiled at him and said, "To be honest, if you want to buy earth rank and heaven rank magic treasures, I certainly recommend you to go to the North sect. After all, the North sect is a great tool refining sect. The quality of their high-rank magic treasures is unmatched by any other sect. However, if you want to buy low-rank magic treasures, our Fulu Pavilion is not inferior to the North sect. Moreover, the price is half. If you buy one magic treasure in the North sect, you can buy two here." The male cultivator thought carefully and his expression changed. He did not go to buy earth rank and heaven rank magic treasures. He could not afford those magic treasures even if he sold himself. Just as they thought, in terms of low-rank Fulu, some small sect's Fulu quality was not inferior to the Fulu school. As for low-rank magic treasures, the Fulu school would not be inferior to the North sect. If it was not for the fact that magic treasures had to be produced by the North sect, then it was not bad to use the Fulu schools. Moreover, the price was much lower than the North sect's, which made him very tempted. Originally, he could only buy one offensive Dharma artifact. Now he could buy another defensive Dharma artifact. This was an irresistible temptation. He quickly made a decision in his heart. He immediately stood up and said, "Please take me to see the Dharma artifact." At the staircase on the second floor, Qing Jingzi and the other Fulu school disciples looked at the bustling scene on the first floor. Their faces were filled with shame. In just 2 hours, the shop's turnover had exceeded theirs in a day. Qing Jingzi finally understood why his uncle master wanted to use this person to replace him. He was sincerely convinced and bowed to Li Mu. "Uncle master has a good eye for people. I admire you from the bottom of my heart." Li Mu waved his hand and said, "You guys go down too. See if there's anything you need help with. Don't just stand here." Including Qing Jingzi, all the disciples went down the stairs. In just a few hours, the shop's situation changed completely. Li Mu knew that professional matters should be left to professionals. Although Qing Jingzi and the other Fulu school disciples were talented and had high cultivation, they were not suitable to sell goods. In terms of business in the cultivation world, the Talisman Charm sect was blessed by the heavens. As one of the 6 sects of Tao, it was a famous brand that had existed for thousands of years. Just its signboard alone was able to attract many customers. If it were to carry out some appropriate marketing methods and bring in some service and sales talents, then the Talisman Pavilion would simply become a large-scale spirit jade machine. Many businesses in the cultivation world were profitable. Not only Fulu school but also Danding sect, the North and South sects, large and small sects and aristocratic families. The cost of 10 pieces of spirit jade would be sold at least 100 pieces of spirit jade. With a little promotion, buy one get one discount, it would immediately become the conscience of the industry. But the spirit jade would be split with Xuanzong. Chapter 535. On the third floor of Fulu Pavilion, Xiaobai and Wanwan were playing aeroplane chess. Occasionally, they would turn their heads to look at a room not far away. Cheng Xian and Li Mu Zinen and sounds could be heard from the room. Dragon language was really difficult to learn. At first, they were curious and wanted to learn it, but because it was too difficult, they both gave up very quickly. In the room, Li Mu looked at the strange characters that Cheng Xian wrote on the paper and made strange sounds. Cheng Xian shook her head and corrected him. "That's not how you pronounce it. Repeat after me %." Li Mu imitated %. "No, it's %. %. Cheng Xian had to correct him many times before Li Mu finally learned this note. He had always thought that he was smart until he began to learn the dragon language. When he first learned the Shengguo language, it was as easy as blowing off dust. However, the dragon language could not be learned in that way. It could only be taught by a dragon hand in hand and mouth. Li Mu also knew many Fey languages, but none of them were as difficult as dragon language. It made him wonder from time to time if dragon language was the language of this world. After learning for a while, he said to Cheng Xian, "Your language is too difficult. If you don't have anything to do tonight, you can stay in my room." With their cultivation, It was no problem for them to not sleep for a few days and nights. Li Mu was now very curious about the dragon race. The first thing he needed to do was to learn dragon language. The Xuanzong Exchange Conference would last for a month. Li Mu was not in a hurry to go back, since he had traveled thousands of miles to come here. In the next few days, he and Qing Xian stayed in their room and didn't come out at all. They studied day and night. Fulu Pavilion's business was also booming. Among the 6 sex shops, only Fulu School was willing to lower themselves and truly think from the perspective of their customers. In just a few days, the Talisman Pavilion's reputation had spread throughout the market, and the number of customers was increasing day by day. Some customers were even willing to come here to buy low-level elixirs and magic weapons, instead of choosing the Danding sect and the North sect. Pill Cauldron Pavilion, Weapon Forging Pavilion, Spirit Array Pavilion. The disciples of the various sects clearly discovered that the number of customers in their shops for this exchange meeting was much less than in the past. After some investigation, they discovered that many of the customers had been led away by Fulu Pavilion. However, they didn't care too much about it. Cultivators prioritized cultivation. If it weren't for the sect's request, they wouldn't even bother to come here and waste a month doing business. The other sects didn't care, and Xuanzong naturally didn't care either. The better Fulu School's business was, the more benefits Xuanzong would reap. No matter how the other sects and clans competed for customers, Xuanzong would always be the final winner. A few days later, under Qing Xian's tutelage day and night, Li Mu finally managed to reach a rudimentary understanding of dragon language. Of course, he was still far from being able to understand the Dragon King's diary. Today there was a lecture by Xuanzong. Li Mu planned to go listen. First, he wanted to go out and get some fresh air. Second, he had received Xuanzong's invitation to participate in the lecture. For this exchange meeting, Li Mu was the only second-generation disciple of Fulu School. He still had to give face to Xuanzong. There weren't many people in Fulu Pavilion today. There weren't even many customers in the market. On the neighboring island, a large training hall was packed with people. Today, Xuanzong's experts would be lecturing here. They would also answer some questions about cultivation. It was possible that one sentence from them could save many people months, or even years of cultivation. Even cultivators who came for business purposes wouldn't miss such a grand event. At the front of the training hall, there were several seats. Those seats were reserved for the seniors of the 6 sects of Taoism. Generally speaking, those who could sit there were second-generation disciples of the 6 sects of Taoism, Dongshuan's experts. Except for the young man sitting on the left. A few days ago, he spent a lot of money in the market and severely embarrassed Qing Xuanzi. Later, people began to inquire about his identity. They learned that he was the disciple of Fu Daozi, the supreme elder of Fulu School. Although his cultivation wasn't as high as Dongxian, he was a true second-generation disciple of Fulu School. He was in the same generation as the chief-in-chief of the 6 sects. Below these seats, there were about a dozen seats which belonged to some well-known cultivation clans and mid-level sects in Zhuzhou, as well as some Xuanzong disciples. As for the others, they could only sit cross-legged on the ground and listen. That's Master Shen of Jing Country. The Shen family started with a spiritual jade mine. His family's strength is no weaker than a mid-level sect. I heard that he bought a talisman of creation from Fulu School. A heaven-grade Fulu costs at least 100,000 spiritual jades, and he has to prepare 10 sets of talisman liquid. The Shen family is really rich. The 6 sects have to be the richest. Fulu School sells a Fulu for 100,000 spiritual jades, and he has to prepare his own materials. This is simply robbing spiritual jades. You can't say that. Who doesn't know that the success rate of a heaven-grade Fulu is extremely low? 10 sets of materials may not be enough to make one. Moreover, I heard that the rules of Fulu Pavilion have changed. The Fulu Pavilion doesn't accept spiritual jades before it's completed. It can be said that the 6 sects have a conscience. The crowd kept talking. When more than 10 young disciples of Xuanzong flew down from above and landed on their seats, the cultivators sitting cross-legged in the Taoist field were in an uproar. It's Qing Yunzi. He's only in his 30s, but his cultivation has already reached Dongxian. He's Xuanzong. No, he's the first among the fourth-generation disciples of the sixth sect of Taoism. He's bound to be the next sect master of Xuanzong. Although his cultivation was piled up by Xuanzong with a lot of resources, his talent can't be ignored to be able to push his cultivation to Dongxian in such a short time. Qing Qingzi, Qing Xuanzi, Qing Shuangzi, and Xuanzong's young geniuses have all come out. I really envy them. Each of them has amazing talent, and has such a powerful sect behind them. Sooner or later, they'll become the strongest in the world. Amidst the discussion, Li Mu's gaze swept across the young disciples. When his gaze swept across a young disciple, he felt a sense of familiarity in his heart. That young disciple called Qing Qingzi gave him a sense of familiarity. However, Li Mu had never been to Xuanzong before, and he didn't know any Xuanzong disciples. He quickly searched through his memory, and soon, this person's figure overlapped with a shadow in Li Mu's memory. A few years ago, when Li Mu was still working in the North County, the wife of the Rat King under the White Demon King was once injured by a human cultivator. The human cultivator who injured the Rat King's wife was the one who killed Xiao Bai's entire family. Xuanzong's Qing Qingzi looked exactly like that person. Not only that, but his aura also reminded Li Mu of the aura that remained in Xiao Bai's grandmother and the Rat King's wife. Just as Li Mu confirmed this person's identity, a fierce shout came from a futon in front of the training hall. "Give me back my grandmother's life." A white figure flew up from the futon. The sword in his hand was already unsheathed, and the tip of the sword was pointed at Qing Qingzi. This sudden change immediately attracted the attention of countless people in front of the training hall. The cultivators in the training ground were extremely shocked. There was actually someone who dared to assassinate a disciple of the Xian sect, right in front of the elders of the Xian sect. This kind of suicidal behavior could be considered crazy. Qing Qingzi and the other young disciples didn't expect this to happen. Facing that figure, the others didn't move. They believed that Qing Qingzi could deal with it alone. Qing Qingzi was stunned for a moment. When he came back to his senses, he unsheathed the long sword on his back and faced the figure. After a short exchange, he found that the beautiful woman's cultivation was almost the same as his. He was shocked and confused. When did he provoke such a strong cultivator? Facing such an opponent, Qing Qingzi didn't dare to underestimate her. He immediately used several of his most powerful spells. However, facing his spells, the woman only cared about attacking and didn't defend at all. Every time his attacks landed on her body, they would immediately dissipate. After a short exchange, Qing Qingzi had already determined that the woman not only had a good cultivation, but also had a defensive treasure. He wouldn't be able to defeat her in a short time. Just as he was feeling anxious, the old man in the front seat suddenly stood up and snorted. He said loudly, "Who are you? How dare you come to my Xuanzong?" As soon as he finished speaking, a transparent giant hand appeared in the void and grabbed at the woman. Under the pressure of the giant hand, the cultivators with low cultivation suddenly felt like Mount Tai was pressing down on them. They found it difficult to breathe. Even the strong cultivators in the creation realm found it difficult to breathe. They were shocked by the power of Dongxian. Under the pressure of the giant hand, Xiaobai couldn't move. She could only watch as the hand grabbed at her. In the next moment, a figure that wasn't very big but made her feel at ease stood in front of her. Li Mu floated in the void in front of Xiaobai. He didn't do anything. The aura in his body swept out, and the giant hand collapsed. After a moment of silence, there was another uproar. "Isn't that the senior from Fulu School? Why is he helping this assassin? Didn't you notice that this female assassin is the beauty who has been following this senior around? What's wrong with Qing Qingzi? He seems to have a death feud with this beauty. This is going to be interesting." The conflict between Fulu School and Xuanzong. As the crowd discussed in low voices, someone suddenly realized something and said in surprise, "The one who attacked just now was Senior Miao Yuanzi from Xuanzong. He has advanced to Dongxian many years ago. This senior from Fulu School is only at the 5th realm, but he blocked Senior Miao Yuanzi's angry attack so easily. It's unbelievable." Only then did the crowd realize this. They all looked at the figure floating in the void with shocked eyes. Among the disciples of Xuanzong, Qing Xuanzi's face was pale. If Elder Miao Yuanzi's palm strike had landed on him, he would have been seriously injured even if he didn't die. However, it was easily resolved by this person. Thinking of the conflict between him and this person, Qing Xuanzi suddenly felt a wave of fear. Li Mu slowly landed and looked back at Xiaobai. Xiaobai bit her lower lip and tears welled up in her eyes. She choked and said, "Benefactor, I..." Li Mu held her in his arms with one hand and patted her back. He said softly, "I know. Leave the rest to me." Wanwan and Cheng Xian also left the crowd and quickly stood beside Xiaobai. Li Mu waved his hand and a golden light shot out. Qing Qingzi suddenly felt his waist tighten, and he couldn't circulate his spiritual power. Then he was dragged to Li Mu by a huge force. At the front of the training hall, Miao Yuanzi looked at Li Mu with a gloomy face and asked, "What is the meaning of this?" Li Mu shook his wrist, and the bound Qing Qingzi knelt on the ground. He looked at Miao Yuanzi with a gloomy face and said, "You connived with your disciples to bring disaster to the great Zhou and kill my sister's family. What right do you have to ask me?" The two looked at each other, and the atmosphere was extremely tense. Beside Miao Yuanzi, a female cultivator stood up and said, "Senior brother Miao Yuanzi, junior brother Ling Jizi, let's sit down and talk. There may be some misunderstanding. The 6 sects are one family. Let's not hurt each other." The people of the Danding sect stood up. Miao Yuanzi's face didn't soften. Instead, he looked at Li Mu and said, "Junior sister Jade Sun, you all saw it. Today it was Fulu School who provoked you first. It wasn't my Xuanzong that was rude." Jade Sun walked in front of Li Mu and said, "Junior brother Ling Jizi, let this disciple go first. If there's anything, we can talk about it slowly." After all, this was Xuanzong, and Li Mu wasn't an unreasonable person. He took back the immortal binding lock. Miao Yuanzi waved his sleeve, rolled up Qing Qingzi, and flew up to the Dao Palace. Li Mu followed with Xiaobai and Wanwan. Seeing this, Jade Sun and the elders of the other 4 sects looked at each other and shook their heads helplessly. They also flew up. Even with the Xuanzong elders presiding, the training hall still became chaotic. What's going on? Xuanzong is a righteous sect. How could a disciple of Xuanzong do something like killing people? There must be some kind of misunderstanding. I also think it's a misunderstanding. The disciples of Xuanzong who stayed behind also sighed. Qing Songzi shook his head and sighed. I've already advised senior brother Qing Chengzi not to be too eager for quick success, but he just wouldn't listen. He likes to kill demons for their demon cores and souls. Now they've come knocking on his door. Although Qing Songzi deliberately lowered his voice when talking to his fellow disciples, there were nearly 10,000 people in the training hall, and many of them had high cultivation. It was easy for them to hear what he said. What? Qing Qingzi likes to kill demons? Isn't this forbidden by the big sects? Besides, the Great Zhou court doesn't allow this kind of behavior. Forbidden is forbidden. Killing demons isn't killing people. How could a core disciple like Qing Qingzi be punished by the sect for killing a few demons? So what that senior said is true. So what if it's true? So what if it's false? How can Fulu School's strength compare to Xuanzong? If you were Xuanzong's sect master, would you punish a core disciple for such a small matter and damage the sect's reputation? Hearing the discussion, a Xuanzong female disciple glared at Qing Songzi and said, "Qing Songzi, can you shut your mouth?" Qing Songzi said innocently, "I'm just doing this for senior brother Qing Qingzi's sake. Let's go up and take a look. I don't know how the sect master will punish senior brother Qing Qingzi." They can't even compare to Danding sect and Spirit Formation sect. Only Taoist Miao Dun looked at Qing Qingzi and asked seriously, "Did you really kill that fox demon?" Qing Qingzi knew that he couldn't hide it in front of these elders. He said regretfully, "I didn't know that the fox demon was the sister of the Fulu School's martial granduncles." Taoist Miao Dun said angrily, "I didn't expect you to do such a thing. Come, let's go see the sect master." Elder Bai Mei looked at Taoist Miao Dun and said, "Wait." Taoist Miao Dun frowned and said, "Martial uncle, Qingqingzi violated the sect rules. Elder Bai Mei looked at her and said, "In the Miao generation, your talent is second only to your senior brother. Now even Miao Xian and Fulu School's Yuzhen have already transcended. But you're still in Dongxian. Stay in the sect and cultivate. Break through as soon as possible. Don't worry about anything else. Martial uncle, you can leave." Taoist Miao Dun looked at Elder Bai Mei. After taking a deep breath, she bowed and said, "This disciple will take her leave." After she left, Elder Bai Mei glanced at Qingqingzi and said, "It's just killing a few demons. Those who are not of our race must have a different heart. The Great Zhou court is muddle-headed and treats demons as common people. Sooner or later, they will be harmed. Now that all the cultivators in Zhu province are gathered here, if we punish a Xuanzong disciple for a few demons, won't we Xuanzong be ridiculed by all the cultivators in the world?" Qingqingzi was overjoyed. Since the Grand Elder said so, he had nothing to worry about. The other Xuanzong elders also fell into deep thought. The Grand Elder's words made sense. If it were any other time, given the relationship between Fulu School and Xuanzong, an ordinary Xuanzong disciple would probably be expelled from the sect for committing such a big mistake. Even a fourth-generation core disciple like Qingqingzi would be severely punished. But now it was the quinquennial Taoist exchange. All the Taoist cultivators in Zhu province were gathered in Xuanzong. If this matter were to spread, it would damage Xuanzong's reputation. As the top sect of Taoism, Xuanzong's reputation was much more important than a fourth-generation disciple. Elder Bai Mei looked coldly at Qingqingzi and said, "From now on, you are not allowed to leave the sect until you reach Dongxian." Qingqingzi had just reached the fifth realm. Although he could enjoy a lot of resources in the sect, he did not know how long it would take for him to reach the sixth realm. Although he was unwilling, he could only bow and say respectfully, "As the Grand Elder commands." Xuanzong, Peak Taoist Palace. Li Mu was still talking with Jade Sun when Miao Yuanzi flew in alone. Miao Yunzi asked, "What's the result?" Chapter 537. Xuanzong on the Taoist Field. A Xuanzong Dongxian elder replaced Miao Yuanzi and preached to the tens of thousands of cultivators in the field. Most of what he talked about was the foundation of cultivation. At this moment, some people in the field were seriously comprehending, while others were still curious about the result of the incident just now. Although Xuanzong was powerful, Fulu School was also one of the 6 Taoist sections. They wondered if Xuanzong would disregard the brotherhood of the sect for an inner disciple. Soon Qing Yunzi, Qing Songzi, Qing Xuanzi, and several other fourth-generation disciples returned to the field from the Taoist palace above. Then, a stream of light flashed and Miao Yuanzi floated in the air. He looked at the crowd and said lightly, "What happened just now was a misunderstanding. Now that it has been clarified, there is no need to think too much." Although Miao Yuanzi said so, there were more than 10,000 people in the field, and there was no lack of clever people. How could they not know the deeper meaning of his words? If it was really a misunderstanding, the senior from Fulu School would have appeared with him at this moment, but he was alone at this moment. It seemed that Xuanzong chose to protect the disciples of his sect for the sake of face, and did not care about the feelings of Fulu School at all. Even if they felt that this was not a good move, Xuanzong undoubtedly had the strength to do so. In the world of cultivation, strength was everything. Without strength, there was no right to reason. This was the sorrow of weak forces, but they did not expect that the powerful Fulu School would have such a day. As the number 1 Taoist sect, Xuanzong had strength above all in the world of cultivation. Everything included the other 5 sections. In the field, no one blamed Xuanzong, and few people sympathized with Fulu School, because this was the rule of the world of cultivation. At this time in the market, the cultivators who did not go to listen to the preaching were almost crazy. The Fulu Pavilion had just released the news that they would sell Fulu books below the heaven rank for free. They did not need spiritual jades, and as long as they provided materials for writing talismans, the Fulu Pavilion would write talismans for them for free. The yellow rank Fulu Pavilion provided 1 portion of talisman fluid, 2 portions of profound rank, and 4 portions of earth rank. The Fulu school would then write corresponding talismans for them. Everyone knew that the higher the level of the Fulu, the lower the success rate of forming a talisman. If one went to any sect or family that was good at Fulu and asked for an earth rank Fulu, which one of them would not ask for more than 10 portions of spiritual liquid and a large amount of spiritual jades? As long as they asked for 4 portions of spiritual liquid, they would be guaranteed an earth rank Fulu. Miao Yuanzi glanced at him and said, "I said don't interfere in this matter." The elder looked up at him and slowly retreated. After leaving the Taoist palace, he flew to another mountain. In the Taoist palace, Taoist master Miao Dun looked at Miao Yuanzi and asked, "Senior brother, don't you think that Xuanzong has changed and is no longer the Xuanzong of the past?" Miao Yuanzi looked in the direction that the elder disappeared and sighed. In the end, he was indifferent and speechless. Not long after, accompanied by 2 elders, Daoist Chengzi flew out of the mountain and went straight to the market below. His face was gloomy and he said in a low voice, "It seems that the Fulu school really doesn't take Xuanzong seriously these years. Since that's the case, I'll teach this arrogant disciple a lesson on behalf of Fu Daozi." On the 3rd floor of the Fulu pavilion, there was an hourglass on the table in front of Li Mu. It was the hourglass that he used to keep track of time when refining pills. At this moment, the sand in the hourglass was almost gone and there was only a small handful left. Before the sand was completely gone, a powerful aura suddenly came from the top of the Fulu pavilion. It was the aura of Xuanzong's Grand Elder, Daoist Chengzi. Daoist Chengzi's figure flew from above and he said angrily, "Junior of the Fulu school, you've repeatedly challenged my, Xuanzong's, bottom line today. I'll teach you a lesson on behalf of Fu Daozi." The voice of Xuanzong's Grand Elder reverberated in the market and into the ears of countless cultivators. At this moment, everyone's impression of the Fulu school had improved greatly. Xuanzong's behavior just now was extremely immoral, and now it was even more outrageous. A Grand Elder of a sect with a cultivation of the 7th realm was bullying a 5th realm junior. How could such behavior be done by a fellow Daoist? Just as the surrounding cultivators began to sympathize with the young man from the Fulu school, on the 3rd floor of the Fulu pavilion, Li Mu looked at the remaining sand in the hourglass and took a step forward. He was already outside the Fulu pavilion. He looked directly at Daoist Chengzi and said coldly, "Xuanzong, you shameless old man. Do you think you're qualified to teach me a lesson on behalf of my master?" There was a long line of cultivators at the entrance of the Fulu pavilion. When Li Mu's voice rang out, the noisy market instantly fell silent. If Xuanzong scolded their Grand Elder like this, the Fulu school would probably completely fall out with Xuanzong this time. Although this sentence pleased many cultivators, they also knew that this young man's fate would probably be very miserable. After all, there was an insurmountable gap between their cultivation levels. Daoist Chengzi also did not expect this young man to be so presumptuous. His face instantly darkened. In the void, an invisible hand grabbed at Li Mu. It was the same divine power that Miao Yuanzi had used, but its power was completely different. Li Mu felt that his body was trapped by the power of heaven and earth, and could not move at all. Even the ordinary Dongxian could only watch as the giant hand grabbed at him, let alone the creation realm cultivators. This reminded Li Mu of the first time he met the Lord of Illusions. However, he was no longer the weak cultivator with divine power that he used to be. Li Mu used his mind to disperse the power of heaven and earth around him. The law bell flew out of his body and merged with Li Mu's body. At the same time, a Fulu talisman appeared in Li Mu's hand. He used his dermic powers to activate the talisman. The Fulu burned, and the shadow of a woman walked out of the Fulu. She exuded the aura of a 6th realm cultivator. Below, the crowd exclaimed in surprise. "He's actually planning to resist. This aura. Is this a heaven-grade golden armored divine army talisman? It seems a little different. Even a heaven-grade divine army talisman is useless. A 6th realm cultivator is no threat to Elder Dao Qingzi." To everyone's surprise, the shadow of the woman who walked out of the Fulu didn't attack Dao Qingzi. Instead, She merged with the young man from the Fulu school, causing his aura to rise to the 6th realm in an instant. The invisible giant hand was already reaching for him. Li Mu didn't dodge. The bell shadow on his body flashed, and the giant hand collapsed. The bell shadow also collapsed and dissipated. He knew very well that the Empress Divine Avatar wouldn't exist in his body for long. Before Dao Chengzi could do anything else, he had already launched an attack. He used his mind to control the power of heaven and earth. Wind and thunder intertwined around Dao Chengzi. The 6th realm elders of the Black Sect who had rushed over after hearing the commotion felt a chill in their hearts when they saw the wind and thunder. This was definitely a supernatural power that only a 6th realm cultivator could use. Dao Chengzi stood where he was and looked at Li Mu indifferently. A protective shield appeared around his body, blocking the astral wind and lightning outside his body. The next moment, dark clouds suddenly gathered above his head. Wind mixed with black raindrops fell, and the shield around Dao Chengzi's body started to thin rapidly. The dragon clans call the wind and summon the rain. A hint of shock flashed across his eyes. Outsiders might not know, but he knew better than anyone else that the power of these spells was comparable to that of the most powerful cultivators in Dongxian. Of course, this was far from enough for him. He floated in the air, and only maintained the shield. He didn't do anything else. Even with his status and position, he had failed to capture a 5th-level junior personally. If he were to make a move again, even he would lose face. When he used all his trump cards and completely understood that the gap between the two realms couldn't be closed no matter what he did, he would realize how laughable he was. He would become a joke who overestimated himself, and was like an ant trying to shake a tree. Countless elders from Xuanzong had already flown out. They floated quietly outside, and no one intervened. If they had to intervene in the battle between the Grand Elder and the junior from Fulu School, after this exchange, Xuanzong would also become the biggest joke in Zhuzhou. However, they looked at Li Mu with fear that shouldn't exist. The disciples of the Qing generation looked at the battle in the sky. Instead of fear, they were shocked and terrified. This person was only the same age as them, but he could already fight the Grand Elder. Even if he lost in the end, no one had the right to laugh at him. In the sky, Li Mu didn't have time to pay attention to the discussions below. Without a doubt, without relying on the Empress or the demonic corpse, Dao Chengzi was the most powerful enemy he had ever encountered. His most powerful attack couldn't even break through the defense set up by Dao Chengzi. There seemed to be a natural barrier between the two of them. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't cross it. If he couldn't fight head-on, he could only use his wits. Li Mu took a deep breath. His Qingxian sword flew out instantly, turning into sword shadows that filled the sky, and attacked Dao Chengzi. Tens of thousands of swords flew out. A 6th realm elder from Xuanzong narrowed his eyes. He took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "What a powerful Taoist technique. With this technique, he can probably fight Dongxian as a creation and transcend as a Dongxian. With his current cultivation level, not many people in Xuanzong can take this technique head-on." Jade Sun floated in the distance and murmured, "This Taoist technique has probably touched the edge of the 7th realm. In other words, if we really fight, we won't be his match at all." Dao Chengzi's expression was still calm as he looked at the sword shadows that filled the sky. However, a hint of seriousness appeared in his eyes. He strengthened the shield outside his body. The sword shadows crashed into the shield and collapsed one after another. However, the dermic power shield also thinned at a speed visible to the naked eye before finally dissipating. However, there were only a few sword shadows left. Dao Chengzi's dermic power swept out. He stared at Li Mu indifferently and said, "Junior, what other skills do you have? Show them all." Before he finished speaking, his eyes narrowed. The last few sword shadows collapsed under the sweep of his dermic power. However, there was still an illusory sword that didn't slow down. It pierced through his forehead at a speed that couldn't be dodged. The small sword pierced through his forehead. A huge black sword came from afar and pointed directly at Dao Chengzi. Dao Chengzi hurriedly took out a square shield. The huge sword collided with the square shield and sent Dao Chengzi flying for thousands of feet. The two Xuanzong Grand Supreme Elders who had just arrived didn't intend to let him go and chased after him. A Xuanzong Grand Supreme Elder said in shock, "It's Martial Uncle Tian Yangzi and Martial Uncle Tian Qingzi. They actually came in person." Tian Yangzi and Tian Qingzi were famous Taoist experts. The two 7th Realm Grand Supreme Elders of Fulu School appeared here at this moment. It meant that ever since that incident, Fulu School didn't plan to be friendly with Xuanzong. On the ground, countless ancestral state cultivators were dumbfounded. Today was really an eye-opener for them. Not only did they see Dongxian Transcendence experts injured, but they also saw a battle between Transcendence experts. This trip to Xuanzong was really worth it. Li Mu landed on the ground and walked all the way to Fulu Pavilion. Everywhere he went, the bustling crowd automatically made way for him. Yu Zhenzi didn't participate in the battle. Instead, he immediately flew to Li Mu's side and asked with concern, "Are you okay?" Li Mu smiled and said, "I'm fine. Senior sister, I've made you worry." The spiritual snail in the storage space had been vibrating for a while. Li Mu took out the spiritual snail and injected magic power. The Empress's voice immediately sounded. "What happened on your side? I felt that you used that avatar." Li Mu said, "It's already taken care of. It's not convenient to talk about it now. I'll explain it to your majesty when we return to the divine capital." Zhou asked again, "Are you okay?" Li Mu said, "I'm fine. Your majesty, don't worry." In the Chang'e Palace, Zhou didn't ask any more questions. He took the initiative to put away the spiritual snail, and then said to Mr. Mei, "He should be in Xuanzong now. Order the officials of the East County to investigate what happened in Xuanzong." At the entrance of Fulu Pavilion, Li Mu said to Qing Jingzi, "Pack up and prepare to return to the divine capital." Qing Jingzi led the disciples back to the pavilion to pack up. At this time, a female cultivator walked to Li Mu and asked nervously, "Senior, can we stay in Fulu Pavilion?" Behind her, there were more than 10 pretty female cultivators. They looked at Li Mu nervously. These female cultivators were the shop assistants that Ma Feng recruited. Li Mu said to them, "There won't be Fulu Pavilion in Xuanzong anymore. If you're willing, there's still a place for you in the new Fulu Pavilion in the divine capital of Great Zhou." The girls said in unison, "We're willing." The female cultivators happily went to Fulu School to help pack up. Li Mu looked up at the sky. Dao Chengzi was already slightly injured. Under the siege of 2 Grand Supreme Elders, he was in a sorry state. Up in the sky, the battle was still going on. However, at a certain moment, everyone suddenly disappeared. After a moment of shock, everyone was in an uproar. Where are they? Why did they all disappear? Strange. Why can't I see anyone? In an instant, the elders of the two sects disappeared. At the entrance of the Fulu Pavilion, Li Mu's vision blurred. When he reappeared, he was in another space. This space was very big, much bigger than the Empress' secret garden, but not as big as Li Mu's Demon Emperor's space. Other than the size, there was a big difference between this space and Li Mu's Demon Emperor's space. After the Demon Emperor's space had a new master, it went from being dead silent to full of vitality. There were mountains, rivers, lakes, grass, trees, fish, and insects. It was like a small world. Although there were mountains, rivers, trees, and grass in this space, there was no life. The mountains were gray. The trees on the mountains were withered. There wasn't a trace of green. The water was black. There wasn't a single fish swimming in the water. The grass under Li Mu's feet was yellow. The entire space was dead silent. The 2 Taishang elders and Yu Zhenzi were beside Li Mu. In front of them were the 4 elders of Xuanzong. In the middle of the withered grass, an old man sat cross-legged. The old man had no eyebrows or beard. There were only a few strands of messy hair on his bald head. Wrinkles crisscrossed his face, mixed with brown patches. He sat there with his eyes closed and his head bowed. There was no breath coming from him. He was like a dead man. But in Li Mu's eyes, what sat there was not a person but a mountain. This mountain stood tall and lofty, unreachable. One of the important reasons why diabolism did not dare to invade on a large scale was that Tianjizi had not yet fallen. But this was not a reason for Xuanzong to bully others. Li Mu had promised Xiao Bai that he would let her personally avenge the death of her clan members. He had left Xuanzong today, but the matter between him and Xuanzong had only just begun. Li Mu contacted Xianjizi with a communication talisman and told him that he was going to rebuild the Fulu Pavilion in Chengdu. Li Mu did not intend to be so ruthless, but now that things had come to this, he no longer needed to give Xuanzong any face. At this moment, a large portion of the Zhu province cultivators in Xuanzong had reserved the Fulu Pavilion. They would come to Great Zhoushan, due to collect talismans within 3 months. The price was so low that it defied common sense. If others were to write talismans, they would naturally lose out. But if Li Mu did it himself, he would make a great profit. He wanted to build a cultivation market square in Chengdu that was even larger than Xuanzong. The imperial court would only take a maximum of 10% of the profits from the peddlers in the market square. He would also build a Dao field next to the market square, and invite experts from the Department of Worship to preach the Dao every few days. The market square and Dao field would be open all year round. With the imperial court's influence in Chengdu's excellent location at the center of the Zhu continent, this Daoist exchange meeting in Xuanzong would be the last. When they passed by Chengdu, Li Mu and Xiao Bai got off the flying boat first. The 2 Taishang elders and Yuzenzi continued north to return to the ancestral court. As soon as Li Mu stepped into the house, the space in the courtyard fluctuated. The empress walked out with Mr. Mei and Shengguan Li. Li Mu walked forward and said, "Your Majesty," Zhou Yi said with a sullen face, "I know." She walked to Xiao Bai and hugged her gently, saying, "Sister will avenge you." Xuanzong didn't even give face to the Fulu school, let alone the Great Zhou court. Li Mu walked forward and said, "Your Majesty, please calm down. Xuanzong is powerful. This matter needs to be discussed at length." Zhou Yi said indifferently, "I won't be so impulsive." She looked at Mr. Mei and asked, "Have you found out?" Mr. Mei nodded and said, "Yes, Xuanzong has a total of 23 orthodoxies in the Great Zhou. They are scattered in the 5 counties in the east. Like the 6 sects of Dao, there was not only one orthodoxy. In addition to the ancestral court, there were also many subsects in charge of providing fresh blood to the ancestral court. Many disciples of the ancestral court were promoted from these subsects. Generally speaking, the Great Zhou court would provide convenience for these subsects. For example, they would be given some blessed land with abundant spiritual energy as a mountain gate for them to use for free. Zhou Yi said coldly, "Order the 5 counties to take back the land the court gave them. Tell them to get lost. From now on, there is no Xuanzong Taoist field in the Great Zhou." However, in the long term, it was a plan to remove the firewood from under the cauldron. As long as Xuanzong opened his mouth, countless people in the cultivation world would join him. However, geniuses needed to be nurtured from a young age. If they missed the opportunity, it would be very difficult for them to become a top expert in the future. In the face of the Great Zhou court's coercion, Dao Qingzi was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Move a few more islands and temporarily settle them here. Xuanzong has been passed down for thousands of years, and has seen many dynasties change. If the Zhou dynasty thinks that they can challenge Xuanzong, I don't mind supporting a new ruler of Zhu province." No one expected Ling Jizi's revenge to come so quickly. All of Xuanzong's Taoist temples were expelled from the country, and a good exchange meeting was ruined. In just a few days, 30% of the cultivators left for Chengdu of the Great Zhou. It would not be long before what happened in Xuanzong in the past 2 days spread throughout the cultivation world of Zhu province. As the #1 sect of Taoism, they had lost all face. Xuanzong no longer had a foothold in Great Zhou. At this time, a group of cultivators came from the Thousand Fox Nation in the distant Life province. Ever since the Thousand Fox country and the Great Zhou dynasty had formed an alliance, they had opened up a trade route to each other. Zhejiang County, and the Thousand Fox Country had even opened up a trade route. Various large sects and families had gradually begun to do business with the demon country. They used spiritual jades, magic treasures, pills, and other items to trade for the Yao nation's abundant spiritual medicines and profited a lot. In the imperial palace, Illusion Princess paced around in her chambers and muttered to herself, it's been so long, and he still hasn't come to see me. He doesn't recognize me after he's done with me. Bastard. At this time, Fox 6 suddenly rushed in and said, Your Majesty, I just heard something from those human cultivators. Illusion Princess said angrily, I don't want to hear it now. Fox 6 said, It's about Li Mu. Illusion Princess immediately looked up. Speak. Fox 6 said slowly, I heard a few human cultivators discussing something. They said that a few days ago, Li Mu and Xuanzong had a conflict. Even the 7th realm elders of the two sects were alerted. Fox 6 described Xuanzong's matter in detail. After hearing this, Illusion Princess was furious. She gritted her teeth and said, Damn it, how dare they bully my man? I'll bring people to flatten their sect. Fox 6 hurriedly advised, Your Majesty, don't be rash. Xuanzong is the most powerful sect in Zhu province. They have 5 7th realm cultivators, and rumor has it that they even have 8th realm cultivators in their sect. Let alone us. Even the Empress of Great Zhou can't touch Xuanzong. Oh right, there's someone who wants to trade spiritual medicines with us. It's Xuanzong's disciple. At the entrance of the palace, more than 10 human cultivators were waiting. Although Zhu province was vast and had abundant resources, there were also many people. The spiritual medicines sold everywhere were often expensive and priceless. However, the Yao nation was different. This place was rich in spiritual medicines, and the demons didn't know how to refine pills or write talismans. They could buy or trade spiritual medicines they needed at a very low price. Standing at the front of the crowd was a man in a Taoist robe. The cultivators tacitly kept their distance from him. Xuanzong's disciples were high and mighty. They didn't want to get close to them, even if they didn't look at them. Not long after, a beautiful demoness walked in from inside. She glanced at the crowd and asked, Who's Xuanzong's disciple? The cultivators sighed in their hearts. Xuanzong was indeed Xuanzong. Even in the desolate Yao nation, Xuanzong's disciples had the privilege of being received first. The man in the Taoist robe stood out. He raised his head and said arrogantly, I am. The beautiful female demon looked at him and confirmed, You're Xuanzong's disciple? The man puffed out his chest and said, Xuanzong Hua Xuanzi. Fox 6's gaze turned cold. She said indifferently, Except for this Hua something from Xuanzong, everyone can go in. Hua Xuanzi was stunned. He asked, What about me? Fox 6 looked at him and said coldly, I'll give you 3 breaths. Get out of here, and tell your sect that Xuanzong's disciples are not welcome in Qianhu Nation. The next time you dare to step in here, I'll break your legs. Get out. Chapter 542. In the Taoist palace, Dao Qingzi ordered, Miao Xian, arrange a few disciples to help Qing Qingzi's family take over the Yan kingdom. A figure walked up and said respectfully, Yes, master. The Xuanzong elders were silent for a moment. One of them couldn't help but say, First elder, please reconsider. Our sect is detached from worldly affairs, and has never interfered with the affairs of the secular countries. If we interfere with the internal affairs of the Yan kingdom, we will be criticized. Dao Qingzi said lightly, The Yan kingdom is a small country. They are willing to be the loyal dog of the Zhou dynasty and look down on the Xuanzong. If we don't punish them as an example, there will be others who don't know what's good for them in the future. I will show my power. No one is allowed to say anything. Tianjizi had personally ordered that the Grand Elder would take over after the sect master left the sect. The group of elders couldn't disobey his decision. The Grand Elder's personality wasn't good before, but it wasn't like this. Everyone faintly felt that he had lost all face in front of all the cultivators in the world. A demon had already formed in his heart, and it was causing his personality to change from extreme to even more extreme. If this continued, no one knew what would happen to Xuanzong. The more he wanted to protect the sect's reputation, the more the sect's reputation would be lost. If he had dealt with it impartially and handed over Qingqingzi, the sect's reputation would still be slightly damaged, but things wouldn't have turned out this way. All the dojos were taken back, the outer sect disciples were expelled, and the inner sect disciples were ostracized in the Great Zhou and the Yao Kingdom. In the hearts of all the cultivators, the 1,000-year-old sect's reputation was ruined. At this moment, many elders began to doubt whether Tianjizi's decision was right. Under the Grand Elder's arrangement, a few elders of the Fifth Realm left the sect quietly and went to the Yan Kingdom. A few days later, in the divine capital of the Great Zhou, in the morning court, the envoy of the Yan Kingdom knelt in the Ziwei Palace and begged. The rebels of the Yan Kingdom have surrounded the palace. I am under the orders of the King of Yan to ask for help from the Shangguan Kingdom. Li Mu stood in front of the palace, looking surprised. His original intention was to put pressure on Qingqingzi's family through the imperial court of the Yan Kingdom, but he didn't expect that the Zhao family of the Yan Kingdom would rebel. He once asked the envoy of the Yan Kingdom. The Zhao family was only a mid-level cultivation family, and did not have the power to rebel. The power controlled by the royal family of the Yan Kingdom was enough to destroy the Zhao family 10 times over. To be able to force the royal family of the Yan Kingdom into such a situation, there must be someone behind the Zhao family. Obviously, Xuanzong was the only one with such strength and a reason to help the Zhao family. The spies of the imperial court in Xuanzong sent back news that after Li Mu and the others left, the hierarch of Xuanzong, Miao Yunzi, also went out to travel. At this time, the person in charge of Xuanzong was the Grand Elder Taoist priest, Cheng Zi. With his personality, who valued face more than anything else, he was capable of doing such a thing. The request for help from the Yan Kingdom's envoy caused a huge commotion in the imperial court. After some discussion, a civil official said hesitantly, "Your Majesty, I think that this is the internal affairs of the Yan Kingdom. Great Zhou should not interfere." The Yan Kingdom was a vassal state of Great Zhou and paid tribute to Great Zhou every year. Great Zhou had the responsibility to protect the Yan Kingdom, but the premise was that the Yan Kingdom was invaded by foreign forces. If someone in the Yan Kingdom rebelled, it was the internal affairs of the Yan Kingdom. Since the founding of the Yan Kingdom, Great Zhou had not interfered in the internal affairs of other countries, except for the Shen Kingdom, which provoked the Yan Kingdom. This was the important reason why the southern countries had always been at ease with Great Zhou and paid tribute to the Yan Kingdom. This time, Great Zhou could send troops to help the Yan Kingdom with the reason of bringing order to the chaos. Next time, it might use other reasons to interfere in the internal affairs of other countries. Once this rule was broken, the southern countries would be in a state of panic, which was not good for the stability of the Zhou continent. After some discussion, the officials of Great Zhou unanimously decided that the Great Zhou would not send troops to the Yan Kingdom because of the internal strife. After the court, the officials of Great Zhou dispersed. The envoy of the Yan Kingdom walked out of the Ziwei Palace in a daze, his face full of sorrow. This was the sorrow of a small country, being caught in the middle of the great powers. Its fate was no longer in its own control. The Yan Kingdom would soon fall into the hands of the rebels. At this moment, a figure walked past him. Suddenly, something fell from his sleeve. The envoy of the Yan Kingdom picked up a stack of yellow paper talismans and called out to the young official of Great Zhou, who had plunged the Yan Kingdom into a whirlpool. He said in a hoarse voice, "Sir, you dropped something." Li Mu turned his head and said lightly, "I didn't drop anything." The envoy of the Yan Kingdom was stunned for a moment. He looked down at the stack of paper talismans in his hand. The talismans on the fulu were extremely complicated. He felt a little dizzy just by looking at them. The talisman paper seemed to be made of special materials. Each piece of fulu seemed to contain boundless power. He had clearly dropped it just now. Why did he deny it? Chapter 543. Li Mu was the cause of the Yin imperial family's calamity. Even if the great Zhou couldn't send troops to help, Li Mu wouldn't just sit by and watch. The 6 Taoist sects were detached from worldly affairs and never participated in worldly struggles for imperial power. It was Dao Qingzi who broke the rules of the cultivation world first, so Li Mu couldn't be blamed for his carelessness. In fact, Li Mu already knew that Fulu weapons above the heavenly level were prohibited from being sold. This was the consensus of the 6 sections. The golden armor talisman wasn't like the creation talisman. Although both Fulu weapons were at the heavenly level, one could save lives while the other could take lives. Having a heavenly level golden armor talisman was equivalent to having a powerful cultivator from Dongxian, who could destroy more than half of the small countries in the south. If this kind of Fulu could be bought with money, the cultivation world would be in complete chaos. However, Li Mu didn't accept the money from the Yen imperial envoy, so it wasn't considered selling. Moreover, he was standing on the side of justice and had a clear conscience. The Zhao family's rebellion had been destroyed, and Xuanzong was at his wits' end. If Dao Qingzi was crazy enough to send a 6th realm elder to interfere with the Yan's affairs, all the countries in the Zhu province, including the Great Zhou, would unite to resist Xuanzong. The imperial courts of the various countries and the Taoist sects had always minded their own business. No matter which country it was, the imperial court didn't want to have a power above their country. Even the Great Zhou wouldn't interfere with the internal affairs of other countries. Li Mu and Xuanzong had been at odds ever since Dao Qingzi chose to protect Qingzi. Unfortunately, he didn't have a Dao integration cultivator by his side. Otherwise, he could have led his men to Xuanzong's mountain gate and forced them to hand over Qingzi. Li Mu also realized that his own strength and that of the Fulu school were still too weak. Otherwise, Xuanzong wouldn't have dared to offend the Fulu school for an inner disciple. All along, every step he took had been smooth sailing. The conflict with Xuanzong was his first major setback. Xiaobai's enemy was in Xuanzong, but Li Mu couldn't avenge her. These days he had been blaming himself. This was probably the first time that Li Mu was so eager to improve himself and the people around him. The cultivation market in the divine capital had to be set up successfully. Li Mu needed enough spiritual jades and spiritual herbs to raise the overall cultivation of the talisman sect's disciples to a whole new level. At the very least, in terms of the number of middle and high-tier disciples, they would not lose to the profound sect. As for the 8th realm cultivators, there was no way. Over the past 10,000 years, the spiritual qi in this world had become thinner and thinner. It was no longer possible for a 9th realm cultivator to be born. Even 8th realm cultivators were hard to come by. Other than Tianjizi of the Xian sect, there was no other 8th realm cultivator in Taoism. The only sect that could have an 8th realm cultivator was the demon sect. However, Li Mu couldn't work with the demon sect. This notorious organization was the enemy of all righteous sections. Fortunately, the only person on the continent who had a chance of reaching the 8th realm was one of Li Mu's closest people. Today, the Empress was wearing a piece of clothing that Li Mu gave her. She leaned lazily on the dragon throne and read the latest novel. As the continent's youngest 7th realm cultivator, Li Mu hadn't seen her cultivate. If the Empress had an 8th realm cultivation, why would he need to work so hard to accumulate strength and wait for Xiaobai to avenge her? He would have brought people to fight Xuanzong long ago. Zhou Yi felt Li Mu's gaze. She put down her book and asked, "Why are you looking at me?" If the Empress was willing to work hard, he wouldn't have to. Li Mu thought for a moment and said, "There's no point in always reading. Why don't your Majesty cultivate and try to break through as soon as possible?" Inside Xuanzong. Inside a Taoist palace, Qingzi knelt on the ground with a crazed expression. He gritted his teeth and said, "Grand Supreme Elder, the Yan Kingdom's royal family humiliated our Xuanzong. I beg you to send the chief elder to the Yan Kingdom to kill the Yan Kingdom's royal family and raise the prestige of our Xuanzong." Dao Qingzi glanced at him and said, "Take him away and make him face the wall for 10 years. He's not allowed to step out of discipline peak for 10 years. Qingzi was obviously crazy. If he killed the Yan Kingdom's royal family, Xuanzong would become the most powerful sect of the evil Dao. This was not what Dao Qingzi wanted. The fourth-generation core disciples in the palace watched Qing Qingzi being taken away. Qing Xuanzi's face was even paler than Qing Qingzi's. He was glad that he didn't fight Li Mu to the death. Otherwise he would have been the crazy one. Dao Qingzi sat on the main seat. He closed his eyes and said, "You can all leave." The disciples bowed and left the Taoist palace. When Dao Qingzi was the only one left in the palace, the door of the Taoist palace slowly closed. Darkness shrouded Dao Qingzi. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded in Dao Qingzi's ears. "Are you angry and unwilling to accept this?" Dao Qingzi's expression changed. He shouted, "Who is it? Come out." He scanned with his divine will but didn't find a second aura. At this moment, the voice sounded again. "Don't look for me. I'm in your heart. You're me, and I'm you." Dao Qingzi had cultivated for more than 100 years. He knew what he had encountered. Something that seems insignificant now can cause a huge change in the future. Miao Yunzi thought for a moment and asked, "Can this catastrophe be stopped if we don't hand over Qing Qingzi?" A light appeared in the old man's empty eyes. He murmured, "No, but this is the only chance." Miao Yunzi shook his head. "Disciples still can't imagine." The old man smiled. "I can't imagine either. Cultivate well. Fortune can be a disaster. Disaster can be a blessing. No one can say for sure. It's a catastrophe, but it's also an opportunity." That you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.